Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, spirits of all ages, welcome to the BlunderSpeaker Show. Welcome everyone back to the BlunderSpeaker Show. Yes, indeed, this is the show about Spirit Island. We talk about Spirit Island, we prepare for Spirit Island, we play Spirit Island, and we recap everything that we learn about Spirit Island. Everything happens in one take in this show, and I have spent the last 10 minutes doing the most ridiculous thing. Oh God, I'm always laughing about my intro, and today has been completely ridiculous. I'll get into that in a minute. My name is Tepid Goose. Of course, I am your host for the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you back here with me today. Today we are Tuesday, 6th of May. It is now 18 minutes past 9 local time, which wouldn't be a great time for starting a playthrough, but we should be okay, given that today is, of course, a podcast episode, and we are here to talk about Habsburg Livestock Colony, otherwise known as the Habsburg Monarchy. Let me tell you about my ridiculous intro, and let me just get that out of the way first of all. I've been sitting here for the last 5 to 10 minutes trying to yawn. I've just been watching a YouTube video of people yawning to try and make myself yawn. Because have you ever had that feeling where you just kind of have a yawn in your jaw or in the back of your throat somewhere and you know it's there, but you just can't quite get it out? I have had that, and I've been sort of trying to force myself to yawn, to get it out and get rid of it and not have to worry about it. And I kind of did about 10 sort of 3/4 yawns, and I didn't quite get a full one. So I can even feel it right now. I am so ridiculous. I don't know why I'm telling you this. But anyway, that is the way this show goes. It is, of course, called BlunderSpeaker. And if I blunder my way through an introduction, I'm not stopping and starting it again, because that's just the name of the show. Now, what have we got to talk about today? I do, of course, have some nice beer with me here. Let's take a moment to talk about that. Trouble Brewing. Let's get it up on the screen there. Let me see if I can catch that one there. Trouble Brewing. It's called Ambush Juicy Pale Ale. It has been a very warm day out there today. Very, very nice indeed. We are getting a bit of a stretch of decent weather over here in Ireland, which we don't often do. So it's nice while it's there. So I got myself a nice little juicy pale ale. Low on the absolute volume. I think it's about 4.5%, something like that. Let's have a look. It's 5%. Oh yeah, I love this beer. Yeah, it's good. Good friend of mine, Hoagie. Hoagie, if you're listening, I know you like to listen to the show. I know this is one of your favorite beers here, and you may well be sitting at home sipping on one of these yourself. But yeah, that's going to be a good one for today. I was at a wedding at the weekend, and let me tell you, it was full of terrible beer. I won't recap and recount all of the the terrible beers I had, but it was one after another. I kept just trying different ones. I had a pint of San Miguel. The reason I'm bringing it up, of course, is because I was talking with the Spanish beers last week, and San Miguel is the one I couldn't remember. Had a pint of it for the first time in a long time, and it is an undrinkable beer. Absolutely dreadful. So I was working my way through a whole pile of stuff, and none of them were really working for me. So I said, I'm giving up. I'm not going for a lager this evening. Despite the nice weather, I'll stick with a bit of a juicy pale ale there and be very happy with that. Now, another thing I need to tell you, because I always seem to need to talk about this at the beginning of the episode, and that is, of course, the sound and the rig. Now, rig-wise and sort of position-wise around me, I'm pretty happy with what I have. So I talked about this on the playthrough for Habsburg last time out. I had spent a bunch of time trying to figure some stuff out, getting stuff moved around, again, getting the mic into the right position, given what I'm learning time after time, and each episode I'm learning something new about the sound with this particular piece of equipment. Now, this time, well, last time I thought I nearly had it right. Turns out, again, there were some issues. There always are. Unfortunately, I always find some issues. But as it's kind of happening, it sounds like I'm just sitting at home here and just stumbling and fumbling, and I'm getting nowhere. I am actually getting somewhere. Every single time things do change. Maybe not necessarily improve, because there's always something new coming in and a new problem I have to solve, which sometimes I can only solve so much. But I've had a bit of a breakthrough this evening, I do believe. Fingers crossed. I'm going to touch wood and do all that kind of stuff, even though I'm not really a superstitious person. However, I do believe I figured something pretty important out. Two of the filters that I have on my input, and before I do any of the production after the fact, I just had to reverse the order of them. So I had a noise gate and I had a noise suppressor. One was I think always before the other. I think I just saw that as part of a tutorial and I never thought to change it. But if I reverse the order of them, it seems to have cut pretty much all of the background sound out that is not basically my voice or something sort of loud, maybe taps on the table and things will be picked up. But all of that kind of ambient sound in the room, the fan, of course, we've talked about before. I have the window open, which I will be from now on. Any of the background sounds out there, like I do believe I'm getting to the point where I can more or less cut most of that out. And last time again, there was some of that getting through, and it's that kind of sludgy low, but it's there in the background. And when I'm trying to do different post-production efforts on that, it starts to break up my voice. I lose parts of my voice, or I increase some of that sibilance, which I talked about last time. But anyway, again, I don't really know why I'm going through all of this right now, but that is just unfortunately me. I tend to waffle, as you probably know and found out by now. But if you're here, I do appreciate you being here. If you're new to the show, of course, do consider maybe giving the old like and subscribe if you like what you see and hear on the show. But look, that's going to be it. We're going to get in, and I'll just give you a little quick overview of what's actually coming up on the episode if I eventually get there. So we will, of course, as we always do, start out looking at the adversary panel. And again, as I say, that's going to be Habsburg Livestock. We're going to talk through then, there's a whole bunch of community inputs, of course, which there always are. And a big thank you again to everybody who's gotten involved. And then we'll sort of run through similar pattern to before. We'll talk about how they beat us. So the things that they're kind of coming and looking to attack with, and the different angles of attack, let's say, and sort of how we lose, that type of thing. And then we will go and we will look at, after the fact, then sort of some of the ways in which we will beat them. Now, I've heard from lots of people already as part of the inputs that people do tend to struggle with this adversary. And I've noticed that myself over the years. They do tend to be one of the ones where a lot of kind of sort of inputs and sort of community conversation is around the struggles that people have with Habsburg. I put them third on my list, and that is in no way an indicator of them being, not very difficult. The only reason that they're third and not first or second is because the other two are your kind of difficulty 11, which we will get to on another episode. But that is basically to say that Habsburg Livestock are very difficult, but there are ways to beat them, and as I say, we will look at those ways later on. Finally, then we'll close out the episode with a little bit of a breakdown of the playthrough, which I did last time out. I did, of course, play against Habsburg Livestock myself, as I always do. So we'll have a small bit of a breakdown on that one, and we'll talk through some kind of learnings and some sort of patterns and things that we saw, as well as we always do. Finally, then, of course, we will close out with our what's coming up next. We'll talk through and we'll look at our options for the playthrough for next time out, and that's going to be it. So it's going to be a great show. I'm really, really looking forward to it. In case I forget to mention, I'll probably say it multiple times. I really like Habsburg. I really like playing against Habsburg. They're one of my favourites. Probably joined second, I would say, with Scotland. I talked about Scotland as well before being a big favourite of mine. So Scotland and Habsburg I really, really enjoy. Neither of them are first, and I haven't mentioned who's first so far as part of this because they haven't come up yet. So clearly that is going to be one of the final two that are happening after the fact for those with massively impressive deduction powers. But that is for another day, as I say. Now, let's start off and we'll look at the adversary panel. And we'll bring it up on screen, of course, as well. As always, as I do, I start up with the top left of the card here, and we will look at the additional loss condition. This is called irreparable damage. It's funny, actually. I was looking at this earlier on. I was just reading through the names on the card, or on the abilities on the card, and it's funny how you just play so many games of a game over such a long period of time, and some things just completely go over your head, and it's like you're looking at it for the first time. Like this irreparable damage, I swear I've never read that name of that ability, despite playing against these a bunch of times. It's called irreparable damage. This is going to say, track how many blight come off the blight card during ravage actions that do 8+ damage to the land, and if that number ever exceeds players, the invaders win. Okay, so we're talking about ravaging first of all, and this is an adversary that do care a fair amount about ravaging. This lost condition here is pretty iconic, very, very challenging and difficult, which we'll talk about plenty in the episode. And basically what this does is, so when you do a ravage to the land, if you place a blight, you're going to basically check how much damage that was dealt there. If it's going to be 8 or more, this is now counted as a lost condition ravage, let's call it. And then you're going to check how many of those lost condition blight are added during the game. So that's a clear distinction here. It's not the amount of times that you ravage, it's the number of blight which come off the blight card. So sometimes that will just be a single blight. If there's no blight in the land and you do a big ravage for 20 or whatever it may be, and you place a single blight, that is now going to count towards one of your lost condition blight throughout the game. If there was a blight already in the land, for example, and you do the same 20 ravage and you don't stop it, you're now going to do a blight cascade. So you'll add one, and then you'll cascade into another land, and then you'll add another. If you stop there, that's now 2 blight that's come off the card. If you cascade again, that's 3 blight, and so on. So very important here distinction. This is not the number of times that the ravage goes through, it's the number of blight that get added. And that number of blight is the track that you're looking for here. That's the card, that's the number you're tracking against. So if I'm playing true solo and I take a single blight one time, I'm allowed to have 1. It's the second blight that kills me. So if later in the game I do it again and I blight, I lose. Or if at one stage in the game I do that single time blight, but it does the cascade, again, I lose. So that's the kind of track here. It's the number of players versus the total number of blight. Final point just to mention on this is that the blight does actually have to come off the blight card, and that is an important distinction for one particular spirit in particular, which we will talk about plenty throughout the show, but do note that that is the case. It has to actually come off the blight card. Now, so that's our lost condition. Next up is our escalation, and this is called Seek Prime Territory. This says, after the explore step, on each board with 4 or fewer blight, add a town to a land without blight or towns. On each board with 2 or fewer, do so again. Ouch. This one stings. So, couple of things here. So first of all, it's after the explore step. So we're going to go ahead and explore the usual sort of stuff. And then after the explore step, after we're finished exploring, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to check how many blight is on each board. So this is a per board thing, right? So for each board, we're going to check how many blight are there. If it's 4 or fewer, we're now going to go ahead and we're going to have to place a town somewhere on the board that does not contain either a town or a blight. Then we're going to go ahead and check and we're going to see if it's 2 or fewer. And if it is, we're going to do that again. So essentially, if you've got 2 or fewer blight when this escalation hits, you're going to have to add 2 towns to your board, which hurts. And they, of course, have to be spread out because you won't be able to add them in the same land. So you're now going to start spreading towns across the board. And as we'll find out, towns are a disaster. But having towns on your board against Habsburg is a disaster. So you really don't want to do this. So really important here, right up front, you're going to look and you're going to go, how can we shut this ability off as quickly or as well as we can? And that, of course, if you haven't played against Habsburg and you're trying to figure this out on the fly, that is going to mean you need blight on your board. And by the way, do bear in mind here, this is something that starts on turn 2, because as we'll find out in a few moments, Habsburg only have 2 stage 1 cards once you reach a certain level of their abilities. So you're essentially going to be the Explorer in the first turn is going to be your last stage 1, not the initial Explorer, of course. You do the initial, then you do your Explorer on the first turn, and then on the second turn, immediately you're hitting that stage 2 card. So this hits you quick. Now, final note as well here, just to bear something in mind, technically this can be shut off. Because you do have to add the town to a land without a town or blight. So in theory, this can actually be shut off if you have no such lands on your board. But the chances are, if you have no such lands on your board probably has a ton of blight anyway. So you've also probably just shut the thing off by default. But it's something to bear in mind. Now, so that's going to be it, right? And then, of course, you've got your 6 levels. Every adversary has them, and it's the same case here. And you're going to go from a 3-3-3 at your base level up to a 5-6-3. which is quite an interesting sort of unique structure that Habsburg have. It's fairly unique. Scotland is kind of somewhat similar, but really you can see here that Habsburg have front loaded the cards into the stage 1 and the or into the level 1 and the level 2, as opposed to kind of that final level, which is remains only 3. So fairly iconic as well there. And of course that will affect how you play against them, which we will talk about. And something also to note here is that on their level difficulty, they're level 4. So if you remember all the way back to the France episode, we talked about France is the single highest difficulty adversary at level 3. So they stand alone in that. But we did talk about there was a couple of levels in there that they were joint on difficulty with Habsburg. So for example, the base difficulty of Habsburg is a base difficulty 2, which is joint with France. They're the 2 most difficult. No one else has a base difficulty of 2, unless I'm mistaken. And they are the joint highest at level 4. With France as well. So France and Habsburg are both difficulty 8 by the time they reach their level 4. So really level 4 is, we'll talk about it when we get there. You feel the pinch for sure when you get there. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back and talk about level 1. It's called Migratory Herders, and it's a very, very iconic thing because it's so early on in the process as well. Most people will be quite familiar with playing against this. And this says, after the normal build step, in each land matching a build card, gather a town from a land not matching a build card. And then it says, in board land order in parentheses. So, first of all, it's after the normal build step. So if you've got extra builds, like if you were combining Habsburg and England, which I don't actually haven't, I think that might be one of the that's one of the adversary combos I have not done, because that is just an absolute horror show, and I don't ever want to do it, but I'll find out someday. But if you happen to combine those two and you had the high immigration build, which we'll talk about when we get there with England, you wouldn't do this for the extra build. It's only the normal build step. So that's the first thing. Second thing, you do not have to successfully build for this to work. So this is after the build step. Now, after the normal build step, if you skip the build, I wish I had checked this before, if you skip the build, you will not do this. I'd be 95% sure in saying, and if it's the case that I'm wrong, I will put a little reminder up on screen to correct myself. But I'm quite certain here. So after the normal build step, if you do not carry out that build, you will not carry out the gather. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. And of course, there are certain fear cards, for example, that will say skip the next normal build step, for example. So if that's the case, you won't do this. But so that's fine. Hi, folks. Coming in to correct myself here in this case. So I got it half right. So with migratory herders, it is true that you do not have to carry out a build in order for this gather to trigger. So, for example, if you would, remove all explorers and everything from a land and then prevent any build action from happening, the gather would still happen after the build. So I kind of got that part right. But what I said here is that if you skip the build step, so for example, using the card Immigration Slows, which is a fear card that at level 2 and 3 will tell you to skip the next normal build, if you would have such an effect, you will still technically have a build step and you will still carry out this migratory herders effect. Even though it would appear as though you're skipping the build step, you actually aren't. The build step will always occur. It'll just prevent any build actions from happening. So essentially, migratory herders will always happen and you can't stop it. Back to the show. Now, in each land matching a build card. So like I said, you don't have to successfully build in the land, but you do have to successfully carry out the build step. So once the build step is done, then you're going to go and you're going to check every single land and you're going to do this ability, which says, gather a town from a land not matching a build card. Okay, so you cannot gather from something if say for argument's sake we've just built in mountains and you have two adjacent mountains, they kind of won't gather from each other, so that won't count. It comes up probably more often. You would see this come up in your coastal lands card. And then also it'll come up a lot when you start hitting your stage 3 cards, where the kind of lands will be adjacent to each other. So they won't kind of do this back and forward stuff. So they have to gather from something that does not match to it. Now, important, in-board land order. So what you're going to do here is you're going to go ahead and you're going to look and you're going to take your lowest numbered island tile that you have in play, lowest lettered, let's say island tile, so A, B, C, D, and so on. So if you've got tile A out there, you'll start with that one, B, so on, right? So then you're going to go ahead and then you're going to go in land order as well. So let's say you're playing on board A and B. You'll start on board A, and then you'll pick the lowest numbered matching land, maybe it's land 1, and then you do that gather. Then you go to the next land, maybe it's your land 6, then you do that one. Then you move to your board B, and then you check your lands there, and you see maybe land 2 is the matching one, you do that one, and then land 7 and so on. So you kind of see there, it's a kind of a numerical, alphabetical first, then numerical after. Okay, now that really matters, and that's extremely important here, and that gives us a huge amount of agency. Maybe not huge, that probably might be an exaggeration, but it gives us some of the amount of agency. But what it really gives you is prior knowledge. So you're going to know how that's going to work, and you're gonna have the knowledge. Once you explore, you can already start to map out, okay, that's the one, that gathers from there, that gathers from there, that one's first, that one's second. So you know the order, and that can be really important, which we'll talk about later on. Final thing to note here as well with migratory herders is gather from an adjacent land. Well, it doesn't actually say the word adjacent, but of course gather is from adjacent lands. This can be shut off with isolate, and again we'll talk about that later on. So isolate is can be a very powerful thing into this adversary, and this is one of the main reasons why. Now that's your level 1. Then we go to more rural than urban. And actually, interestingly, I usually don't do this, but the fear card setup for level 2 here actually goes 4, 5, 2. So it actually only puts 2 cards into that stage 3. So it actually removes one, which doesn't happen all that much as part of the kind of the stepping on most of the adversaries. But interesting to note here, it goes 4, 5, 2. I've never noticed that before. Okay, so more rural than urban. What does this do? It says during setup, on each board, add a town to land 2 and a town to the highest numbered land without setup symbols. And then it says during play, when invaders would build a city in an inland land, they instead build 2 towns. Okay, a couple of things at play here. First of all, get a town in land number 2. Yes, it already contains a city. Now it contains a town as well. So your land 2 is already awful. That's just kind of the first thing. It's got a little flavour of Scotland, and it's got a little bit of a flavour of England as well, because England do a similar thing in land 1, don't they? But yeah, so right off the bat, it's giving you a horror show in one of your coastal lands, and it's also getting a town quite far inland, the highest numbered land without setup symbols. That usually be around your kind of 6, 7, or 8. So you're pushing things in the inland, you're getting things on the coast, you're creating lots of problems. Difficult, and here 2 more towns onto the board, as we're going to find out, is a big problem. So this is already again very, very tough. This is a spike of 2 points of difficulty apparently. And then the other thing is during play, when invaders would build a city in an inland land, they instead build 2 towns. So numerically, it's kind of a 1 step up. It's an extra point of power and of damage and health essentially. So obviously a city is 3 attack, 3 defend, or however you call it, 3 attack and 3 health. But now 2 towns is going to be 2 attack. It's going to be 4 attack and 4 health, isn't it? We'll see. Okay, so that's more rural than urban. Fast spread. When making the invader deck, this is what we were talking about before. This is remove 1 additional stage 1 card. So nice and easy, no rules overhead here. We're just essentially taking out one of those 1s at the front of the deck here. So usually you're going to go, everyone will know this by now. It'll be 1, 1, 1, and then 2, 2, 2, 2, and then your 5 3s at the end. Now you're just knocking off one of those 1s. So you've only got the 2 1s, and as we say, the impact on that is you will start to hit your stage 2 card on the 2nd turn of the game. Really, really, really tough. Now, next, level 4, one of the most famous and arguably the single most difficult sort of spikes of rules in any of the adversaries. If you've played them, you will know this very well by now. It's called Herds Thrive in Verdant Lands, level 4, and this is towns in lands without blight are durable. Keyword bold in bold, so you can't possibly miss it. Lands without blight make their towns durable. What does this mean? This means they have +2 health and destroy town effects instead deal 2 damage per town that they could usually destroy. I added the word usually there. The word usually is not written on that card, but it feels to me like it makes sense. And then it has in parentheses, so to those towns only, destroy all towns works normally. Okay, so let's break this down. So if a land has a town and the land does not have a blight, that town or any number of towns in that land will be considered durable. This durable effect means that they have +2 health. Ouch. So now the town attacks for 2, but it has 2 health, 2 extra health, so it has 4 health. If you have a card that says destroy the town, so you've got something like how do you call that? What's Lightning's card that does it? Can't think of what it's called. Lightning has a card. It also has an innate that does it. Destroy a town. That will now deal 2 damage. Instead of destroy, it's going to deal 2 damage to the land, and of course, because it has 2 extra health, it won't die. So you could combine them. So that's one thing that you can do. So if you have that same land and you do destroy a town and it's durable, it'll essentially apply 2 damage to it, and then you could use another effect that says destroy the town, and then the second time it'll be another 2 points of damage to it, and that will kill it. So you've essentially had to use 2 different cards that both say destroy a town, and that will combine and kill the thing. And I should not need to tell anybody who's listening to a Spirit Island podcast why that is a terrible idea, and we do not want to spend much of our time doing those kind of exchanges. So that's really, really bad news. One thing to bear in mind here, that destroy all towns does work normally. So, things like the Jungle Hungers, what other effects have it? So Sweep Into the Sea has it, but I'm actually, interestingly enough, I'm thinking of a card here, and I wish I'd have looked this up as well in advance. So what's the one where you return, it's a major power, costs 5. I'll put it up on the screen here, but I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I have the major power deck beside me. I'll take 2 seconds and I'll look through it, because this is slightly interestingly here. Let's see how quickly I can find the card. No, I'm picked up the wrong part of the deck. I don't even know nowhere near it. Wow. My goodness me, it's at the very bottom of the deck here. This is a bit of a blunder here, folks. A BlunderSpeaker Show. Blazing Renewal. There it is. I've dropped the card and all. Mother of God, I've had an absolute nightmare. Hang on now. Blazing Renewal. This is an interesting one. This is another one I'll need to rule check myself with after the fact. So, target spirit adds 2 of their destroyed presence into a single land, up to 2 from your blah blah blah. If any presence was added, 2 damage to each town in that land. That does not say destroy all towns. Oh yeah, sure. 2 damage to what am I talking about? I've had an absolute nightmare. 2 damage to durable towns will not kill the town. What am I talking about? That's absolute nonsense. I wish I could cut all that out. This is where if I wasn't committed to one cut, one edit, I would go back about 1 minute and I would cut all of that out. But I'm not going to do that, because I have committed to you to do these things in one take. So I will leave that utter nonsense in. Total drivel, never mind me. Blazing Renewal does not do anything against durable towns, of course, because it's only 2 damage. Now, let's quickly move on from that one. Wave of Immigration, level 5. Another absolute horror show of an ability. Before the initial explore, put the Habsburg Reminder card under the top 5 invader cards. When revealed, on each board, add a city to a coastal land without cities, and add town to the 3 inland lands with the fewest blight. Okay, so let's break this one down. Before you explore, before your initial explore, so during the setup essentially here, because we've reached level 5, we've already done level 3, which took one of the stage 1 cards out. So we now go ahead and we look at, we've got a 1, and then we've got 2, 2, 2. So they're your first 5 cards. 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. Under that third 2, we're going to place this Habsburg Reminder card. And when revealed, so essentially after you've done that third 2, explore, then when you shift all the cards over, you're going to reveal this reminder card, and immediately you are going to add on each board a city to a coastal land without a city, and you're going to add a town to the 3 inland lands with the fewest blight. This is on every board. There's no preventing this. Now, I say there's no preventing this. There is a slight nuance to this. So the way this is worded is add a city to a coastal land without a city. So if you have, if you're lucky enough to have all of your coastal lands containing a city and you're not playing in Scotland, because that's probably going to get your loss condition. So if you haven't combined with Scotland and you have a city in all of your coastal lands, technically you will not take the city from the reminder card, which would be good but really terrible news in truth, because your city has gone to hell. But that's the first thing. Technically that can be prevented. However, the towns cannot. So add a town to the 3 inland land with the fewest blight. That does not say no blight. That says the fewest blight. So what you'll usually do is you will try to add towns to lands with no blight. If you have 3 of them, okay. If you've got 4 of them, then you can make a choice, obviously, because you've got 4 options. If you've got less than 3, so let's say you've only got 2 lands on the inland with no blight, you'll add a town to each, and then you get to make your choice. So then, of course, it's going to go, okay, I've got none left that have 0. Now I check, have I got any that have 1? And if you've got multiple that have 1, again, you can make a choice there. So kind of that's how that works. Needless to say here as well, you are not allowed to do something like in that example I just made there. If you had 2 lands with no blight and you went add 1 to one, add 1 to another, you couldn't then add the 3rd back into that land or something like that. So you kind of obviously have to pick a different land at that point. So that's the way that works. It's awful, obviously. You've just gone ahead and added 4 new buildings to the board, and as we found out, of course, towns are shocking, because they have 4 toughness, or they have 4 health. So yeah, all kinds of bad news. But we'll talk about a little bit how you kind of manage this later on in the game, so that it doesn't kind of crucify your game. Finally, far-flung herds is the last ability here, and this is going to say ravages do +2 damage in parentheses total if any adjacent lands have towns. Now I'm not sure why it says +2 damage total. I suppose that's not per invader or something like that. So ravages do +2 damage total if any adjacent lands have towns. Absolutely awful. It says this is only 1 point of difficulty extra. For me, this is kind of where I don't believe the Habsburg monarchy are level 10. I said last time out that I believe Habsburg play like a sort of a 10.5. If I use that kind of relative scoring again across all of the adversaries, this adversary is not the same level of difficulty as France, Scotland, Brandenburg, Prussia, even HME. That's the 4, I think. Yeah. So that's the other 4 level 10s. No way. This is harder than all 4 of them, for sure. And for me, that's kind of where this is where that spike of difficulty, or that sort of, let's call it quote unquote incorrect difficulty, is. I think this is more than 1 point of difficulty from level 5 to level 6 here. This for me is like a 1.5 or something like that, right? So this is really hard. This is essentially saying that if any invader ravages, and it is important here, it does say in parentheses at the end, this does not cause lands without invaders to ravage. So if the land is empty, it's not now going to ravage for 2, which, Christ, thank God for that, because this would be an absolute outrage if it did. So essentially here what we're saying is, if you have an explorer ravaging by itself in a land, and there is an adjacent town, you will now be ravaging for 3. That's kind of what that means. And obviously it works for any invaders, not just an explorer, right? But this is going to add +2 to almost all of your ravages. Now, a few things to note here. Of course, this is going to make your loss condition much more difficult. That's one thing. Because now you're checking for how much you ravage for. So that 8 damage threshold that you're looking to kind of stay under, it now becomes significantly harder to stay under that because of this. So that's one of the key things at play here. Another key thing at play here is if any adjacent lands have towns. And we already talked about it in level 1 about how isolate is very good into this adversary. Here's the other reason why isolate is very good against Habsburg. It can shut off this ability. Of course, adjacency is one of your key kind of words and terms when we're talking about isolate, and it shuts off the adjacency. So there's a number of things that isolate do against this adversary, and clearly here we're starting to see why that can be quite good. So that's going to be the whole thing. That's your kind of card. Again, as we've done before, we'll start out with sort of just do the what. That's the what. Albeit a very long-winded what. Let's be honest here. 34 minutes of what, and well, actually about 30 minutes of what and 4 minutes of yawning nonsense at the beginning. But there you go. But that's kind of all of that. Now we're going to go in and we're going to hear about the community and what the community talk about. And then after that, of course, then later on, after we've kind of gone through the community's inputs and we've heard all of that and sort of some of my responses to them, then we'll do the breakdown of kind of the detail about how you go about doing it. So let's keep moving on. We're going to start with the likes, and we're going to talk about the people who feel favorably towards this adversary. And right up front here is my goose brethren, and it is Gooseman is a gamer. Gooseman says they are actually one of my favorite adversaries, maybe even my favorite. But I've played them mostly level 4 and below, where the town gathering minigame is a fun challenge I like. Yeah, if you're playing at level 4, it's significantly easier to do the town gathering thing when all of the towns aren't adding +2 to every single ravage. But yeah, I agree. I love the town gathering minigame as well. I'm going to talk about Brett, Gooseman loves Brett, who I've beaten all HLC levels with. So I'll just say that Brett totally counters durable. So who cares about health when you're removing rather than damaging, which is a really interesting point. And for Brett, the town gathering is just another way to break up lands with multiple invaders into strings of solo invaders, just asking for abduction. That's assuming you've already cleared the building lands, which is bread, which is bread, which is breads, bread, and butter. HLC is probably next up in our quest to conquer all level 6 spirits two-handed, so I'm looking forward to that challenge. So really cool. Really like this from Gooseman. I've mentioned it multiple times. I love Breath of Darkness. I think it's a super cool spirit, and I can absolutely see here how that could be a good spirit into this matchup. It does amazing work at preventing builds, as Gooseman says here. You kind of pick off the lone explorers really easily. And here as he's saying, you've got this kind of thing where the mini game, the town gathering mini game, it actually pulls things into different lands, and it almost gives you a path across the middle of the island where you can jump and do this kind of ping pong stuff where you jump into different lands and pick off single invaders. So I totally see how Brett could be really strong into Habsburg, which is really strong into a lot of adversaries. It's just a super strong spirit. Okay, next up is Lorano. I really enjoy Habsburg. And actually, I want to stop here and point out, Lorano is one of about 1 million other people who I've seen do this, who call it Habsburg with a P. Habsburg. I wondered about this. This can't be a coincidence. It can't be that Lorano and about 1 million other people do this for no reason whatsoever. So I'm wondering whether there's something like, I don't know whether it's like the German version of the game or just one of the other foreign language versions of the game spell it differently, or whether it's something to do, because I don't think historically, at least in the English language, that these were called like the Habsburg monarchy with a P. Habsburg, I believe, were kind of olden day Austria before Austria was a thing. I think historically that was kind of the lineage and where it came from there. But yeah, if anyone knows where that P is, I wish I had Googled that. But yeah, hit me up in the comments if you know exactly why that's the case. But anyway, Lorano really does enjoy this Habsburg, and any spirit with positive blight interaction, and they list vengeance, wildfire, and stone shine. Stone honestly trivializes the adversary. They will not be the first person to say this, or they are. Well, they are actually. They are the first person to say this, but they won't be the last person to say it. So yeah, Stone absolutely trounces Habsburg, and the main reason, I might as well go and stop and talk about it now, is the the rule that we talked about right at the beginning in the lost condition, where it says that you have to have the blight come off the blight card. So stone counters that ability, because stone obviously has this special rule, or well, actually it's an innate, not a special rule, which says that you get to take the blight from the box. So they can let a ravage of 1,000,000 come through, it doesn't matter, because they take it from the box, so it won't count towards the lost condition. That's fine. Second place, I'd put the isolate fellas. Rain does awesome. I presume here clearly they're talking about downpour, with the isolation, and as we said already, isolate is really, really good for a number of reasons here. So they're picking up on that one. Interesting there with downpour, I would say they need to be considerate of the foundation sink into mud. I'm a huge believer of downpour. I think it's one of the strongest spirits in the whole game. I think it's broken, or at least borderline broken, and I think you can win basically any matchup pretty comfortably, I would say, with only their uniques and their opening hand. But it is worth pointing out here that they do play a very defensive game, and they let very little blight onto the board. But if they're not letting blight onto the board, their foundation sink into mud is going to have a bit more of a challenge, because you're now going to have to level that all the way up to hit the 4 toughness here. So just something to bear in mind. After that, they say third is characters with good movement or control, like river, lure, and sand. I saw that earlier. I meant to check this. I mean, I presume they mean rising heat of stone and sand, but isn't rising heat a damage spirit rather than a control spirit? But clearly here, river and lure, absolutely very much control spirits, and of course I played lure as part of my game, which we'll talk about later on. And then they say those who suffer are the traditional powerhouses like ocean, thunder, and lightning. And very clearly here, these are 3 spirits which are steeped in offense. And we'll talk about why things are bad for ocean later on. We already talked about lightning and their abilities, which I can't remember. But clearly here, the lightning has a whole pile of stuff that's like destroy a town, and for durable reasons. That's not good news. Okay, next up we have No Scene 2295. Good to see you back, No Scene. So haven't posted in forever, but HLC is my favorite adversary, so gonna try add a couple of things. And they say a couple, they really mean 7. So, we've got 7 inputs here, but they're good ones. So 1, I love how they make you value certain power cards higher than normal, and more specifically, your blight movement cards really come in handy. Do we really care about those against any other adversary? So nice point. Love that one. Lost condition is so tough here. Number 2. But having said that, when you're going to let it happen, sometimes it's so good to just make it happen big and get a land with something like 15 durable ravage in one go. So yeah, this can definitely work. So just put a whole bunch of stuff, whether you're playing Finder or somebody like that, just get a whole bunch of stuff in one land, let the ravage in, and then now you've got access to, a whole bunch of, like we said, jungle hungers or any of that kind of stuff, that will now be prime fodder for a card like that. So again, if you don't have a kind of a cascade going on here, and this is one of your sort of I'll let it through lost condition ravages, 1,000 damage is the exact same as 8. So yeah, absolutely stack them up if you can. Now, number 3, speaking of 15 towns, they build up hard and fast. So there is something really satisfying about these destroy all effects. Sweep into the sea and jungle hungers are honestly so awesome to use. So I took the words out of your mouth there. Apologies, No Scene. You were about to get there. Number 4, also want to make a comment on the pseudo destroy effect here. So 2 damage on a durable town will kill it on the ravage, or will kill it on a gather into a blighted land. The thinking and planning is awesome. Love this. This is really good, and we'll talk about this later on. I'm going to hammer this point home loads. Planning for the moving, planning for the ravaging, planning for everything with this adversary is key. So if you can do things like this, these are lovely little plays they're talking about here. Deal 2 damage on a town fast before it ravages. It's durable. Then it ravages, places the blight, it immediately dies. Or that won't happen quite as much as the second one. Deal damage to a town somehow while it's durable. Maybe that's in a ravage. Maybe it's a hand counter attack. Maybe it's just a fast power. Number of ways you can do it. Then gather that land out of the land into one of the lands with blight as part of your kind of migratory herders, and it immediately dies, which is so satisfying when you get it. So absolutely be on the lookout for them. Now, number 5, reminder card sucks, but I defy anyone to find a sense of more satisfaction than a turn 4 fast win before it lands. Apart from the delirious joy of a level 6 terror level a terror level 1 victory, there are few things that tickle me as much. I am quite certain I have never done this. Turn 4 fast win against Habsburg is going to be really, really tough. I think Caelan Norris going to be your guy for that with his speed running antics. I'm not a speed runner. I've never really invested in that kind of thought process as far as this game goes, but it would certainly be very, very satisfying to get it done before the thing comes down. Now, number 6, has anyone mentioned wildfire yet? Basically ignores durable entirely. You always have blight where you need it, so it does better than Habsburg Livestock than against most adversaries. And one more blight and you're pretty much already ignoring escalation. So of course then they're talking about you start the game with two blight on the board already, which is really, really strong, and one of the reasons why, among others, Wildfire does have a strong matchup here, is because you pretty much shut off the escalation on turn 1. And they say favorite spirit into favorite adversary. And then finally, shout out to our vitality boys. So Stone always gets thumbs up for stopping the loss condition, as we talked about, but Roots and Nourishing can definitely hold their own as well. And clearly here we're talking about vitality tokens, which came in Nature Incarnate, which of course do a great job. If it ravages for 1,000, like we talked about, one single vitality will soak that up and stop the loss condition because a blight did not enter. Really, really good. Thanks, Noseen. Really nice, and really enjoyed your return to glory there. So thanks for coming in. Big old sup of beer there. Let's get ourselves hydrated and let's keep moving. Taste the rainbow. The adjacent town is so oppressive. It's fun, but yeesh, we really had to stack the spirits to beat it on level 6. Nice and simple here. I did ask them to clarify how they stacked the deck basically to get the win against level 6, and they picked green and vengeance, which I myself, as I'll talk about later, I played green, although I played Tangle's green. Green has some good things against Habsburg for sure. I don't believe they're a counter pick. I think they're only okay, and actually that was why they ended up on the channel, because that was the wild card choice that people made. So I think it was like a kind of a B or a C matchup for Lure and for Green. And I can sort of see it, to be honest. Green is very much about keeping things clean. You're stopping everything. You're stopping ravages. You're stopping bills. You're shutting things down. You're choking it out. And if you're doing that and keeping things clean against Habsburg, they're going to punish you. So it's a little bit tricky. And also green has bits and pieces of damage. It's left in 8, bits and pieces of damage. It's got another card that does it. So it wants to deal little bits of damage, which are going to be rubbish against durable towns. So again, you kind of have to let blight in. And if it's in the lands that you're in already, you're starting to lose your presence that way. So you've got this kind of almost conflicting thing where you want to sack the presence to stop the thing, but you want to let it in, which is already sacking your presence. So I myself found that a little bit of a challenge in the game, and exactly knowing when to pick your spots there is pretty tough. But Vengeance is a good one to mention here. Clearly Vengeance loves blight. It loves having blight everywhere, and I totally understand why Vengeance is a good choice into Habsburg. Now, Shaka UVM, we have been playing it recently around max difficulty. We played Lure, which negates Migratory Herders, plus Finder, plus Transforming, and the Blight, of course, with Transforming turns off Durable. So this is a super cool team here. I really like the sound of this. So Transforming blows something up, which creates the explorers, and then they get pushed via the Finder teleportation network into the lair. So you push them across the whole island, and then Lair traps them all in there because they're not allowed to leave, and then it stops them from moving. And then, of course, Finder can isolate the land, which can turn off like adjacencies with the +2 damage. And then they say that we kept the Lair blighted, of course, to keep the durable turned off in there. And then on the final turn, a twinned miner that did 1 damage to all buildings killed like 15 towns and a couple of cities, which got downgraded into towns and then blown up as well. And we hit a dozen to hand the lair too, keeping it real. So Wildfire went a little crazy, blighting everything on their board. So we were always 1 event away from a blight cascade and probably losing. But with Finder, we could just vacuum up trouble spots into the lair and never blighted out. I love the sound of that game. That sounds fantastic. I love the games where the whole thing just goes to crazy. You've got a million invaders. You've got this kind of balancing act where you're like one event from destruction. You've got blight everywhere. I love those games. So that sounds like a whole pile of fun. Thanks for that, Shaka. Okay, that's the positive side of things. They're the people who enjoy themselves against Habsburg. Then we've got the naysayers here who come in and they say they do not like Habsburg, which is completely fair. So Chetverty Maggie 123, I hope I got that right, Maggie, comes back in and says, after France, this is my least favorite adversary. Okay, I don't hate it, but when compared to other adversaries, it's not very enjoyable for me. It's the only adversary where games tend to feel similar, which I'm not so sure I would necessarily agree with that point. I think there are others. But pretty much every game against them boils down to destroying all the cities on the coast and reaching terror level 3, which I would agree with. But I think that's not that similar, right? But anyway, cities not being built in inland kind of breaks the game when it comes to the lost condition. Why? Lost condition. I actually didn't pick up on this earlier on. I'm not sure what they mean there. It kind of breaks the game when it comes to the lost condition. The lost condition is a bit ravaging. I'm not sure what they mean there. Maybe they mean when it comes to the win condition. Other than that, level 4 and 5 rules are pretty annoying to me. The lost condition can also be swingy with events that increase damage or add invaders to ravaging lands. So the levels 4 and 5 here, let's remind ourselves, are the durable and the reminder card that adds a bunch of plastic. On the more positive note, however, I think that town gathering mechanic is interesting and I like the choice it gives to the player. And the level 6 rule is also pretty unique in my opinion. Not the most interesting thing in the game, but still somewhat enjoyable. So they're a little bit all over the place here in truth, Maggie. There's kind of some things they like, some things they don't. You know, it's their least favorite, second least favorite adversary, but they don't hate it, but it's not that enjoyable. So I feel like they're a little bit in their own head as part of this comment here, but at least they're saying they don't hate it. And they did also put an edit here to say that I'd also like to add something that isn't purely Habsburg related, but I had to learn it the hard way. When playing with Guard the Isles Heart scenario and Habsburg together, the level 5 rule is really nasty. So you need to play around it because you may lose the game if you don't. And I can completely and utterly understand that. Because if you're playing high level Habsburg with Guard the Isles Heart, you're almost certainly going to be hitting that the reminder card into that land. So I could see how that's completely broken and not very fun at all. So if most of your experiences against Habsburg have come playing Guard the Isles Heart, Maggie, yeah, I get that one for sure. Okay, next up, Beta Jin comes back. Of the 6 adversaries released on digital, Habsburg Livestock actually scares me the most. And I can't speak to which 6 adversaries are released on digital. Something tells me Russia probably isn't one of them, because it was part of Jagged Earth, and they're still going through the process of releasing Jagged Earth, and almost certainly Habsburg Mining Expedition is the other one. So I'd say here they're saying that so discount Russia and HME, and then the rest is the pool from which they have to be scared from. And obviously Habsburg is the most scary. So every decision just feels painful with real drawbacks. Contrast that with England, which may be objectively tougher, but it also feels more straightforward for me in determining what I need to do to win. Maybe if I play it more, it will become easier, but I stand by the word quote-unquote scary to describe Habsburg Livestock, and I do definitely agree with that. When I read this card first and I started playing against these guys first, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was the hardest thing ever. Also, maybe playing solo skews my perception. I could see this adversary being smoother with more spirits, whereas England likely gets harder unless you're using strong spirit synergies. And I was really intrigued by this. I asked him to clarify what he meant here. So he came back and he said, for Habsburg, the loss condition is very unforgiving, and multi-spirit can manipulate the blight escalation dynamic a bit. And I think that there may be more opportunities for action exchanges than there are with England, which often just does as it pleases. So action exchange here, if you're unfamiliar with the term, means I give you an action and you give me an action a little bit. Mostly this is kind of referring to the board topology, where kind of part of my board is going to hell and I don't have a solution for it, and then part of your board is something that fits my card a bit better. So maybe you've got an easier land to defend, but I've got a harder one, but you've got a higher defend value. So we kind of swap. I don't love thinking about Spirit Island in this way. I see a lot of the players on the Discord and kind of high level players talk about action exchange all the time. But as I've said before, I don't believe in your board, quote unquote, in this game. I think from the very beginning of the game, you should be looking to kind of spread across. Now, not too far, right? Obviously, if you just go off into the wilderness and leave your whole board behind with nobody helping you, then that's obviously a mess. But I think with proper cohesive play in this game, generally speaking, it's almost never involving you sitting on playing only on your starting board. Now, this is an interesting point here, and I do actually quite agree with this. Now once he clarified what he meant here, I think that lost condition is definitely more manageable when you can start to kind of plan. Maybe there's one board that we let go to hell for whatever reason. Maybe we take a couple lost condition ravages on that particular board. Another reason why I think this would matter a lot is we'll talk about later how I believe you're almost forced to take the first two ravages against Habsburg on the first turn. And if you hit a lost condition ravage on your first turn and there's not really anything you can do about it, sometimes you just need to go ahead and take it. So certain boards will matter, will make differences. Some boards will obviously have worse configurations than others. Obviously, the kind of how the explore lands and all of that will provide a huge amount of variability there. So it just kind of depends. And I think here, the having that spread out on multiple spirits and multiple boards will give you it'll kind of distribute the luck. There's a term for this. The distribution of the randomization, let's say, will be flatter as opposed to kind of spikes and peaks in that randomization. So you're less likely to fall victim to the RNG there, I would say. But with England, I think it's a bit more consistent. I think, as Beta says here, it often just does as it pleases. It's much harder to stop, but I think it's kind of similar from a single board to a multi board. It does very similar things. So yeah, I got a bit too much into that one maybe there, but yeah, thanks for Beta. I appreciated that one. Now, putting stuff off here then says, I quite enjoy them in multiplayer. In solo, the lost condition feels a bit too stringent and prone to variance, though. It means I don't play them as much as I'd like. So putting stuff off, I bumped you into this category of dislike. So I hate to tar you with that same stick there. That's not a phrase. Tar you with the same stick. Isn't it tarred with feathers? I have no idea what that phrase is. But anyway, I hate to tar you with these feathers and put you into this bracket here because clearly you say you do enjoy them. But I wanted to put you in beside Beta because you picked up on the same point here about the lost condition being much harder in true solo, which again I do agree with. Now, Fotsalot says, I haven't tried this, and I don't plan to, but I've noted that Habsburg Livestock would be a very painful matchup for Covets. And we saw Covets on the channel here recently, and they say there's no better way to hurt a dragon than to take away its cities. And I found that out the hard way. It's absolutely true. But there actually is an even better way to hurt a dragon if you take away that sun innate and never let you unlock the sun innate. That hurts the dragon way too much. It's absolutely awful. But anyway, thoughts a lot. I mean, look, you don't plan to, and if you're listening to this, there's probably not a whole pile I can do to convince you. But it's just funny because as I was reading this early on, I was thinking, it's funny how people are different. And I'm in no way criticizing you here. If this is something you're just not into and you don't want to do it, absolutely, that's you and that's your way. And I am not trying to diminish that at all. Because everyone has their own way. Everyone just has their own things that they like and dislike. And this game is absolutely full to the brim of things that people like and dislike. And it's just chock full of conversation points for people. Some people love certain spirits and other people hate them. And that's just the way it is. But I just found this quite interesting and intriguing because I can't imagine myself looking at an adversary and thinking, that's not for me. Whether that's too hard or that's too boring or it's too complex or whatever. I'm just looking at it and just going, nah, not into it. I'm just not going to bother. That doesn't compute to me at all. But it's funny because it does for other people. Other people clearly have that exact perception of things. One other good example would be scenarios. I have a box there full of scenarios that I've probably played maybe half of in like 200 games of Spirit Island, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on something, really. I don't feel drawn towards them very much. I usually enjoy a scenario when I play it, but I don't feel like I have to play it. It's one of them things where I'll get to it eventually at some point. I'll probably do some on the channel and things like that. But again, Fotslot may look at the scenarios and go, I absolutely love them, and you're insane for not playing them. So it's just funny how the way things go. But I thought I'd reflect on that for just a moment or two. Probably too long, let's be honest. Probably about 3 or 4 moments too long there. But anyway. So now, struggles. So that's the people who dislike them. They're out of the way. Struggles are coming from a couple of people here, and we'll have a look at these as well. So Zaratav says, I have been attempting to beat Habsburg Livestock 6 for a while now, trying with Wildfire. So we talked about Wildfire already. So they say, I feel like it is a good matchup, but I just am not a good enough Wildfire player to best them. I always forget about the existence of the loss condition, which is easier to hit than I expect, and suddenly I find myself losing when I thought I was in control. So yeah, we talked about Wildfire, and I do believe that Wildfire is a good matchup. I'm not sure that I've ever played it. Couldn't be sure. I think I might have. But I do believe, Wildfire's kit, I would say, is fairly well suited to beat Habsburg. Now, as I responded in the comments on Reddit, I don't believe that this is a no-brainer matchup. And there are plenty of those. And Stone is a no-brainer matchup. Stone is just go in there, activate your innate, and you can't lose. Stone's a no-brainer. I don't believe Wildfire is a no-brainer in the same way. Wildfire obviously has to place Blight, and it's got this dance that it needs to do where you're going to sometimes have to jump into lands that already have Blight because that's about to ravage for 1 million. And your way of stopping things is not really defensive, it's offensive. So if you've got and they pointed it out here, they said the loss condition is clearly their biggest problem here. So if you've got a land that's about to ravage for 8 and you're looking and you're going, how am I stopping that? Usually the answer is, I'll go into the land, I'll place a Blight, and then I'll deal some damage with my fast powers. But in this case, that's adding 2 more Blight. So I can see how this can get out of control. I do think this is one matchup that does require careful play. I think it's suited for Wildfire, but I don't think it's a no-brainer. And I'm hoping, Zaratov, that that you're watching right now and listening, there are a lot of moving parts to this adversary. And there's a lot to manage, and there's things moving around, and there's a lot of board management involved. So I do believe that Habsburg here are very much a board management adversary. And we talked last time about HME. They're probably the best example of board management and the importance of that, as opposed to land management in isolation, which I think something like maybe Brandenburg Prussia, maybe Russia is another good example, which we'll talk about again, that are a little bit more about your individual lands and the importance of those and sort of how they're coming up in the frequency of the deck. Whereas the 2 Habsburgs, I think primarily are very much about the whole board and thinking about all of the lands in the context of the other lands, which is very challenging. But as I say, we've got some tips and tricks, so I hope you stick around and get some benefit from those. Now, up next we have Zintrosi here with quite a long comment, but lots of really good stuff in here, so let's go through it. Livestock Colony is our most common loss after the 2 Diff 11s. And which are the 2 remaining adversaries, which are England and Russia, that we haven't done yet. And they say, and we've gotten good enough at them that I think it might be on top now. So we've gotten good enough at them that I think it might be on top now. So they think it actually might be even their most common loss. The adjacent town +2 damage is so incredibly annoying to deal with. The loss condition will often mean I'm using a fortified defend on an otherwise unimportant land. In fact, one that might still blight anyway, and even cascade, just so that the blight doesn't trigger the loss condition. And I feel that, believe me. The worst turn is right after the reminder card, so it is well timed to come out right when we're starting to feel on top of things. Maybe we have most of the back parts of our respective boards on a 2-player board cleaned up, but now free towns. Hooray! The obvious best matchup is Stone's Unyielding Defiance, because he just completely invalidates their downsides and maybe even turns them into positives. Extra damage? Stop hitting yourself. Blight added from the Blight card due to damage? Nah, it's coming from the box, so no problem. So absolutely, that's Stone in a nutshell there. And they say another matchup I was surprised by was Stranded Mist. The Isolate can prevent towns from moving inconveniently or from adding their +2 damage. And being able to keep towns damaged in lands means that you can leech them for fear and energy, and then later let them migrate to a blighted land, both destroying them and preventing a useful town from moving in. And that sounds awesome. That sounds like such a fun time. So you're going about, you're isolating a whole bunch of stuff, you damage stuff, you leech them, you put 2 damage on a durable town in a land without blight, leave it there for a bit, and then a turn or two later, when you're ready to off it, you let it gather in as part of the gather for the migratory herders into a blighted land, and it just dies immediately. So you get a kill and you kind of just invalidate the migratory herders. That sounds super cool. They continue on and say, a great major power to Threshold I just experienced was Flocking Red Talons. So the initial hits are 1 damage to a few invaders. So you damage undamaged towns and then you push them adjacent. Then you do another damage to them there. And if there's blight in that land, they die. Or you can push something else out. But if there's no blight, you just push them from that land into a land that does have blight. And then they finally die. So there's got this kind of multiple pushing stuff that happens with Flocking Red Talons. And you get this fun kind of game where you push it into one land, you damage it, you push it into the next land. If there's blight, it dies. If not, you push it again. All this kind of stuff. So they're basically saying you're paying 3 energy for probably 3+ town deaths and 3+ town level pushes. And considering they will only ever have cities in your inland when an event makes them, it becomes doable to clear out a safe zone on your inland. So I highly recommend it, especially since it typically solves 2 lands in 1 card play, and that level of efficiency is hard to beat. Totally agree with that. There's your 2 for 1 that we like to talk about on the show. Your X for 1, if you get something more lands than 1 for 1 card play, is always an absolute key and something to look out for. Nearly done here. We have Dark Dirigible Titan says, probably the only adversary whose play patterns just haven't clicked with me. The level 1 town gather means that stopping a build isn't enough to stop a blight, but it will stop a build. So when is it still worth committing an action to? ? We'll find out later on in the show, believe me. Between the durable towns and escalation, I often really want to let both lands blight in the first ravage, but that means I still have to be incredibly nervous about the loss condition, especially with the +2 damage from level 6. The level 5 reminder card is manageable until the one game where I misremember exactly what it says, or God forbid forget it exists entirely. And believe you me, I constantly forget that card exists. In my playthrough, I talk about it in 1 turn, and then like 10 minutes later, in the same turn, I got to do the Explorer. I'm like, oh yeah, I completely forgot that was there, even just having talked about it. So I always forget that thing is there. All in all, I think Habsburg Livestock does excellently what any good adversary should do. Disrupt a spirit's standard play patterns and force you to think on your feet a bunch. I just struggle with the thinking on my feet part against these guys more than any other. And I have bolded and redded the text on my screen that says, think on your feet a bunch. And I think, Dark Dirigible Titan, this may well be your problem. Thinking on your feet and being too reactive against Habsburg is will lead you into problems. Habsburg plays very, very similarly to HME in many ways, and it's probably not a surprise given that they're both Habsburgs. They do different things, but the planning and board management I just talked about a few minutes ago takes really careful consideration. You have to be playing and planning and thinking at least 1 turn in advance, always. We'll talk about this now momentarily when we get onto the kind of how do we beat them section, but this, I just wanted to pick up on this. Thinking on your feet and being too reactive will get you in trouble here, and we'll talk a little later on about how you can avoid doing that. that's it. That's actually the last thing as part of all of that. So let's reward ourselves with a beer. If you're sitting at home and having a beer and listening along, I hope you're enjoying your beer. For everybody else not having beer, I hope you're also enjoying your beverage if you're having one. I doubt it's as nice as beer. Not many beverages are, but that's neither here nor there. We'll top ourselves up with a bit of sparkling water as well before we continue. Have a few breaths, God forbid. I don't have many of those when I'm doing these recordings. There's that sparkling water, isn't that? Oh, it's a beautiful thing. I can confidently say, anyway, the issues I was having before in the past were not, as I mused one time or another, about sparkling water. That's for absolute sure. But it does get picked up. I have noticed as part of when I'm doing my editing and listening in carefully, I have noticed that the sparkles do get picked up, which is quite funny. Maybe now that I've changed my settings and it's cutting out more of the background noise, you probably don't, or maybe you don't pick it up as much. But anyway, that is that's for another day. Okay, now that's all of that. Again, huge thank you to everybody who got involved there. Really, really appreciate it. There's one or two comments coming in really, really late in the day there. I forget the name. There's somebody else who came in just not long before I recorded, so I didn't get them in, but they were talking about how they literally every single time forget the reminder card despite having played against them hundreds of times. And it's just like every single time you turn it over, you're like, Jesus, I forgot. And it's always at the time when you just like, you're really sure, you're like, yes, I've stabilized this game now, this is beautiful, I have these, have them now, have them where I want them, bam, 4 buildings on the board. And it's always such bad news, and it always feels so bad. But anyway, how do they beat us? Let's start here. Right, we've heard plenty about all the things that they do and whether some people enjoy them or whether they don't. But let's break this down. We've got a couple of things here. First of all, similar to what we talked about with HME, I like the little structure I had there, so I'll follow it again. How do they attack us? I have 3 things here, and it kind of just breaks down Habsburg in a nutshell. What do they do? How do they attack us? Well, they do 3 things. First of all, they counter our damage. And this is all about what they do to counter us. I think somebody else said it there as one of the other comments about how they do a lot of things to counter what we're doing. First thing they do, they counter our damage. Durable towns. How many times have I said it? How many more times am I going to say it? Here's the key. Do not fight durable towns. Do not deal 4 damage to a town unless you are absolutely stuck and you have nothing else you can do. Do not make a game plan around trying to deal 4 damage to towns. It's utter madness. They counter you with the durable mechanic, so do not fight them on that axis. Find a way to navigate around it. That's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is they counter our control. So first they counter our damage, now they're also countering our control. Clearly here, got a pretty applicable what's the word I'm looking for here? Typo is the word that's coming to my head. I'm too used to screens. A misstep there. I'm absolutely all over the place. They counter our control. Let's just throw that in the bin. Let's just start again. Number 2, they counter our control. Right. So they gather after the build. So as, again, one of the most recent comments towards the end there, they were saying it is they can stop a build, but then after the build, they gather the town in. So it's kind of like you didn't do anything, right? Wrong. Absolutely. Stopping their builds is huge. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the gather, it still does counter our control to a large degree because it's still putting the town in there, and that's still going to ravage and blight, which is troubling. But just bear it in mind. The other thing they do is they stop big land tactics. So, a lot of times when you're playing a game of Spirit Island, you will go ahead and you'll start bunching stuff up into lands. And obviously, Habsburg do not have a mechanic which directly punishes you for having 50 towns in a land, or every single invader on your board all in one land. Not directly, at least. Obviously, indirectly, they will punish you, because if they ravage, it's going to be a loss condition ravage. But they don't have one of these kind of loss conditions like England or HME, for example. But they do stop those tactics, because when you try to do it, and usually in a game of Spirit Island, it is a pretty good approach to try group your invaders as much as you can. They're going to start gathering the stuff out of the land again. So you kind of get a big stuff, it ravages, it causes a loss condition ravage, and then like 2 turns later, all those towns have been pulled away and they've all gone into different lands. So it's quite challenging to find the right timing there. So they counter our control. The third thing they do is they counter our defend. They're doing a lot of countering here. They're countering our damage, they're countering our control, and the third thing they do is they're countering our defend. So clearly here, level 6 with the +2 damage is going to do a huge amount of irreparable damage to our defense tactics. It makes it very, very challenging to defend against them, needless to say. But the other thing that it does is the adversary is weakening our Dahan strategies significantly. How does that happen? Well, 2 reasons. First is when we're trying to fight back with our Dahan, usually it's a highly efficient way of dealing damage. The most efficient way, again, we've talked about it a million times before, defense plus Dahan is basically the best thing you can do in this game. Not quite so against Habsburg, because if you're doing defense correctly, for the most part, you're not taking blight under normal circumstances. Against Habsburg, if you do that, if you don't let the blight in, the chances are there's no blight in the land, and it is a durable town. And when you have a Dahan counterattack, it gets weakened significantly, because you need 2 Dahan to fight back and deal 4 damage just to kill a single town. So that's really, really inefficient again when we talk about kind of fighting over those durable towns. But the other problem here as well is, if you want to sort of circumnavigate that, you need to maybe defend, let just enough blight in so that just enough ravage damage through so that it adds the blight, so it turns off durable. But then every time you do that, you're also going to kill a Dahan, which by extension weakens Dahan strategies. So there's a big hit to kind of defend and Dahan counterattacks here. So they're the kind of 3 things that they do to attack us. So how do we lose then? Last time out against HME, I talked about there being kind of one really obvious way that you lose, and then a big gap, and then 2 kind of other ways that you lose the game. Against Habsburg, for me here, I think it's probably fair to say that you've 3 ways to lose, and they're, for me, all roughly about as prevalent as each other. You're just as likely to lose to any of these 3 ways. Of course, it's going to depend on the game, the spirit, your card drafts, whatever. It's not necessarily going to be every single game. You could be randomly any of these 3. But I'd say on average, across all games into Habsburg, you're probably roughly as likely to be under threat with any of these three loss conditions. First, lose control of the board. And this was what we said about HME to be their kind of number 1 thing here. Losing control of the board against Habsburg looks slightly different to what it does against HME, but it's the same principle. So here, I would say this mostly is going to happen after the reminder card, or maybe even more applicable is once you start hitting stage 3. Usually this happens when you did not scale enough in the early game. Now, games go long against Habsburg. I don't think I've said that so far in this episode, and I'm going to reiterate, or not reiterate. By definition, I'm not reiterating it. I'm iterating it. I'm not doing that either. I'm stating it. That games go long against this adversary. I think my game against them went to 8 turns, and that's absolutely, I would say, pretty standard for this adversary. You need to be aware of that fact, and you need to have a plan and a strategy for the long term of the game. We'll get into the strategies now in a minute. We're still talking about how we lose. Generally speaking here, losing control of the board for me happens when you didn't scale enough and you didn't blight early enough. So we talked about it already. Habsburg punish you for clean boards. the escalation is the biggest reason, right? Obviously, if you don't have enough blight as part of your escalation, then you're going to start out taking extra towns. Sometimes 2 if you've got 2 or less blight there. But even at the 4 or less blight, you're still taking a town every single time. So if you haven't taken enough blight, you've taken too many escalations, you have too many durable towns all over the board, and your general ways to fight back and deal damage and sort of clear out invaders become much more inefficient and much more difficult. So that, for me, is the kind of core way that you lose control of the board here. And obviously losing control of the board here can look like a lot of different things. In the HME instance we talked about, you didn't have your mining lands under control. In this game here, for me, it's more like you don't have control of the towns and their migration and just all of that, generally speaking. If you've got too many boards, too many towns on the board, you're going to be punished with the migrations. You're going to be punished with the level 6, with the adjacent +2 damage all over the place. Everything is going to be blighting, and you're kind of just going to run out of steam. You're just going to get overwhelmed by the board. That's the first way. Second way is run out of time. And again, against HME, we talked about this run out of time thing. Running out of time can obviously end in multiple ways. It can end with a lost condition ravage. It can end with just too many blight. But essentially what this means is we didn't really try to play to the board. So kind of in the lose control of the board instance here, and the first instance I talked about before, that's when you're kind of fighting back. You're trying to contain them. You're trying to control the board. You're playing a kind of a normal game of Spirit Island, let's call it, quote unquote normal. This run out of time version of things then is more, you aren't really playing to the board. You're not really trying to contain them. You're generally probably fear racing in this type of game. Or you're maybe racing to a combo or something like that, or you're trying to scale up to reach the top of your spirit, but you haven't done enough to contain the board, and you've kind of ignored the invaders. And maybe you do too many skips. This is another way where you kind of run out of time, is you kind of keep skipping and stalling, but you don't really look to actually make progress on the board, and you're kind of stalling until maybe you get a fear win or whatever, and then you just run out of time because you run out of actions or whatever, and they just overwhelm you. So we heard earlier on by 1 or 2 people that the rush to stage 3 can be a very strong tactic against Habsburg. And it can. I'd say strategy more than tactic there, sorry. And it certainly can be. They've got the 5 cards in stage 1, and they've got, or not stage 1, tier level 1, and then you've got 5 cards in, or 6 cards, should I say, in tier level 2. So that's kind of 11 cards total to get you to that stage 3. By which time, because you've so few cities on the board, that's going to be your most likely way to beat these. So it's a reasonable tactic to rush and try get it done, but do bear in mind that's pretty far away. Your stage 3 is fairly far away, so kind of running out of time here and just not having quite enough is I think, a very real way to lose. Finally then, of course, the actual loss condition itself, very, very problematic and very challenging. For me, the most likely way that you lose to the loss condition ravage would be one of 2 things. One is that you take one early. You just take one and you accept one because you can't really kind of efficiently stop it, and then later on you get maybe edge cased where you thought you were okay, but you've already taken one and you're kind of on that border, and then you get edge case and they do like a +1 or +2 damage, and you lose the game that way. So that's one way. The other way is the runner that we've talked about plenty with other adversaries, that kind of back to back, where maybe in those kind of stage 2 cards there, you maybe hit your coastal. And you kind of get back to back, maybe 1, 2, 3 times in a row, and you just can't stop it. And of course there, that's your kind of, maybe you take 1 blight the first time, maybe that's not a loss condition, but then you do that kind of cascade stuff, which gives you 2 blight towards the loss condition. And honestly, if you're in a game where you've hit the blight cascade loss condition ravage, you're in big trouble, because if you haven't contained it that time, good chance you're not containing it next time, and you're going to be under a lot of pressure here. That's how you lose. That's the bad news. The good news is there is good news. How do we beat them? Now, usually I do a kind of a strategy breakdown and then maybe a tactical breakdown. Here I'm going to kind of piece it all together because I've got different kind of tactics woven into the strategies here. And I am going to do a bit of a breakdown on blight. I'm conscious we're already an hour and 20 minutes in, so this is not going to be a short episode, but as you probably come to learn here, I don't tend to be able to make short episodes. So hopefully you're happy enough and you're along for the ride. We are going to do, we're going to kind of dig in a little bit into the blight stuff, because blight is so important here, and I wanted to have a bit of an analysis on blight as part of one of my episodes, and I figured Habsburg was a very, very, very good place to do it. So let's start there. And the very sort of, remember we talked before about this kind of very good to very bad, or maybe it's the other way around, very good to very bad, the other hands. One of your very, very good things that you can do here, basically the very best thing, is learn to love blight. We've heard it already loads. Getting your blight out there is going to turn off the escalation, and it's going to turn off the durable. So you need to be able to do it. You have to be comfortable with that. So as I say, the very first thing that you should do in almost every game against Habsburg is accept the first 2 blight on the first ravage. That's not going to be turn 1, of course. That's going to be turn 2. So right before they go and explore with their stage 2 card, you have to take 2 blight on your board. You can't accept 2 towns off that escalation once. You can't even do it once. Shut it off so that you kind of shut half of it off, let's say, right? So again, there's 2 thresholds, right? 4 or less and 2 or less. So shut off that 2 or less. Get it done. Doesn't matter what you have to do. Just get it done. Accept presence loss. Accept the hand loss if you have to. Just accept your losses, because you cannot put 2 towns onto your board that early in the game. So that's the first thing. Now, once you get your 3 done, there's different sort of, I've seen a lot of people online talk about this. Some people swear by the get over the first hump and stay there, which is kind of two blight per board. And if you do that on every board, you actually keep a healthy island. You don't flip the blight card. So I can see that being a very acceptable kind of approach to things. So you kind of shut off half of the escalation essentially and just keep it there. I don't love that for the simple reason that, yes, it keeps your island healthy, but you don't put very much blight on your board, which will cause problems for durable. So this will be very, I would say, spirit dependent. And if you have spirits that can find ways to maybe push towns around, maybe you've drafted a card or 2 already that gives you some kind of town movement, I can absolutely see games and matchups where that's your good approach, right? Just get over the first 2 and then kind of leave it there. There's going to be very, very few spirits who can get away with adding no blight and having no durable towns, no blight on the board, and contending with durable. We've already heard breath might be one. I actually do concede that breath is it could be a strong candidate for that. But they won't love the extra towns on the board is one thing. Another one we'll talk about later on is towering roots might be another candidate that might get away with that, but I don't think there are many. So that's the first thing. Now, spread your blight out, okay, is the next bit. You don't really want to be taking blight cascades. And in my game, I did on the first turn, the second turn, the first ravage. On one board, I actually defended one of my lands that were ravaging, and the other land gave me a blight cascade. So I still took 2 total blight on the board, but I did a cascade and then a defend. Now, why is that not good? Because I put 2 blight in one land. And that is not spreading my blight around, and that makes it more difficult to deal damage to towns because there's fewer lands with blight. So it's not a great tactic. I don't really love it. Some games are just going to go that way, and you just have to accept it. It's just one of them things. But we heard early on somebody talking about blight movement cards. So that can be a way where you take the blight cascade and then you move one of your blight out of there, and that could be a fine approach to going about things. Entrap the Forces of Corruption is one good example here, where I actually think that's a strong card against Habsburg. I don't love all of the blight moving cards against Habsburg in truth, but I think Entrap is a good one. Now, blight adding cards is another one here. there's a number of them, obviously, and I've talked in the past about how I generally really like the blight adding cards. Not a huge love of dire metamorphosis in terms of sort of tactical gameplay. I love it in terms of fun. I think it's a super cool card, and I absolutely adore that it exists. It's an amazing card. It's a brilliant design. But from a gameplay perspective, in terms of how actually good the card is, the jury is still out on that one, I think, a little bit. But it's a really fun card to play with. But where the other ones here are Scour the Land, which is excellent if you get the right spot. Drought, I've talked about before. I love the card. I think it's insanely good, and I think if you get it in the right spot against Habsburg, it's fantastic. Even Lands of Haunts and Embers, I talked about. I've come up a lot on that in recent times, is another good one too. The only thing I would say about the blight adding cards is, yes, they can help you get to your thresholds. They help you control when the blight goes onto your board. But one thing to bear in mind here, and I would say as a general approach overall with this adversary, the easiest way for you to turn off the escalation and for you to turn off the durable is to just let the ravages happen. Yes, loss conditions are a problem, but we'll talk about them afterwards. Let's assume we've handled the loss conditions and we're not taking loss conditions. Take blight from ravages, because it helps you get ahead of the tempo of the invaders. So like I said, first turn, 2 ravages, do nothing. Just allow them to come in, and then turn your attention to the next turns and the next cycle of cards from the invaders, and get yourself ahead of the tempo, and do that to kind of get a foothold in the game. So blight adding cards, yes, in the right spot, they're absolutely fantastic, but don't go ahead running into the fire thinking I have to start throwing blight all over this board, because the adversary will just do it for you. One thing to bear in mind here, with blight, and we're talking about different cards and things like that, the cards that have no blight targeting restrictions, so things like Tiger's Hunting, there's one of the movement cards, which we'll get to quite shortly, and one of the miners that moves, that controls cards, it has a no blight restriction. Obviously, you've got things like Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves with Raging Hunt, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that in the game that can't target blighted lands. Just bear in mind with those, they can be a little bit tricky. This is an adversary where you want to get blight on the board, so they can be a little bit problematic here, and for that reason, I think Sharp Fangs is probably a tough matchup for them, to say the least. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to go through every single blight card in this game as part of a deep dive. I've wanted to do this for a while. I had it put aside for this episode, and I think this could be a bit of fun. So there are 23 cards, if I'm not mistaken. I have them grouped in 4 groups, and this usual S tier, A tier sort of stuff. So I have S tier is I'm always happy to see this card, and clearly here, take that with a pinch of salt, right? There will of course be games where I'm not happy to see these, but the vast majority of the time when I flip it, I'm happy to see it, regardless of the matchup. So bear in mind here, my breakdown that I'm going to do now will be, for the most part, matchup agnostic or adversary agnostic, but I will make comments where applicable for some of these where there's details that matter against Habsburg. So you've always happy to see, which is your S tier. A tier is usually happy to see. B is sometimes happy to see, and then C is rarely happy to see. So obviously here, I'm not doing F tiers or anything like that. I didn't bother. I just did S, A, B, C, and C being the worst and S being the best. Now, I'm going to start from the bottom up. So let me get a drink before I do this. I'll bring these up on screen, of course, so that we can read along. Now, C tier, otherwise known as F tier, rarely happy to see. I have 4 cards in here, and it should be no surprise to too many people that 3 of them are still healthy. So let's start. Strong Earth Shatters Slowly. This is one of the still healthy cards. That looks like Jagged Earth to me. Immediately, each player adds 1 blight from this card to a land adjacent to blight. And it's a 2 blight per player card. I think a lot of the still healthy ones are 1 blight. This one is 2 blight, but you immediately, when you flip it, add 1 to a land, to a blight. Add 1 to a land adjacent to blight. So right off the bat, that could help you against Habsburg. That's just one thing to bear in mind. Right away, this could help you get to the threshold against Habsburg. So this, I think, is one of them that's a little bit better against Habsburg than it is against the rest for the most part. So I think that's something to bear in mind here. But usually, this is just, it's one of them stopgaps that just makes the game harder, which is why I don't really like the still healthy island cards at all. It just immediately on every board just adds a blight. It just adds a bunch of blight to your island. Which, and again, it's a land adjacent to blight. It's like you kind of sometimes don't really have a choice. Your hand is a lot of the time forced. Like if this just said add one blight to your island to any land, this would be a lot better for me. I'd have this I'd almost jump this 2 tiers. But because it's like forced to a land adjacent to blight, sometimes you're just forced to like blight cascade and stuff like that. So this can be pretty tough. Next, arguably the worst one of the whole deck, invaders find the land to their liking. Immediately, if the terror level is 1, 2, or 3, add 1, 1.5, or 2 fear markers per player to the fear pool. Almost everybody will know this one off by heart. It's a 2 blight per player card, so it does give you 2 blight, which is quite nice, of a buffer with the still healthy stuff, but it adds fear markers to the pool. I had a famous one where I played against it was Scotland, England, whichever order, I can't remember, in a 6-6. We'll talk about 6-6s, of course, on another day, but it was Scotland, England in a 6-6, which is, if you're not familiar with the rules, you take, it adds way more fear cards to the deck because you kind of take both adversaries' fear cards and add them together kind of thing. And of course, because you're England, it's 5 fear in the pool per player as opposed to 4. And I flipped this card on like this, not the second, the third turn of the game, and I had only 1 single fear card earned at that point. So from that point on, every fear card was costing me 6 fear per player, and I think I had 19 fear cards left in a true solo game. It was some outrageous amount. It was the most obnoxious thing I've ever encountered. And for some reason, I just only ever get this card against England. So it's always against England. And I hate this card with a passion. It's awful. When that card flips, I am never, ever happy to see that. And that's almost its own category. I'm never happy to see that card. Now, up next, thriving communities. Immediately on each board. So this is not a still healthy card. It's only one of the 4 which are not a still healthy. So this is a blighted card. It says thriving communities immediately on each board. In 4 different lands with explorers or towns, replace a town with a city or replace an explorer with a town. And it's a 4 blight per player card. I hate this card. God, I hate this card. And it should be pointed out, it should be borne in mind here that this tier list that I've done here is, I've never seen anybody else do this. I was actually doing a little Google just to see if anyone else had done one, and I haven't seen anybody else do a tier list for the blight card. So I have no idea really the perceptions of the meta game or whatever, whether people think these are good or bad, but these are just my own opinions. And this one is awful. I feel like every time I draw this, I look at the board and I go, oh God, that is a disaster. So this is a bit one of them that's a little bit interesting against Habsburg. Very often in most games, you're not looking to add more cities. So usually you're looking to do the upgrade and explore into a town. Not against Habsburg. We've already seen why towns are awful against Habsburg. So in that case, you're almost forced to do the town up to the city because it removes the towns, which is good news, but then you're just filling your board full of cities, which is awful. This one is just it just adds basically 4 power and 4 health to every board, which is sometimes that looks like 2 towns, or like in a vacuum, 4 power and health is 2 towns, but it's not 2 towns because it's spread across 4 lands, so it makes 4 lands worse. It's just awful. I hate that card. The other card is Thriving Crops, and this is the third of 4 still healthy cards. And I actually said the still healthies usually have 1 blight per player, but I lied because almost all of them have 2, it looks like here. So this is another one with 2 blight per player, and this is another shocking one. Thriving Crops, immediately on each board, build in 3 lands. And build actions in lands without invaders normally build 1 town. So that just basically means if you choose an empty land, it's going to build a town. Absolutely horrific. This one is basically adding best case scenario 6 power and health. 6 attack and health. I always call it power and toughness for magic. I'm still doing that to this day in this game. What do you call that? 6 attack and health. Which is way worse than Thriving Communities, but it's in 3 lands instead of 4. And that's assuming you haven't added any cities in there. It's just awful. Obviously, this is a worse effect, but it is a still healthy card, so that kind of balances out in that way, and because it gives you an extra 2 blight per player to the pool. But Jesus Christ, 3 different lands I'm going to go and build. It's just awful. They're not rarely happy to see. They're comfortably all never happy to see. I hate all of those 4 cards. That's fine. That's our F tier. So I've renamed it. It's not C tier anymore. That's F. Never happy to see. So let's move swiftly on from that one, and let's move into the B tier, which is sometimes happy to see. We'll skip rarely, and we'll go straight to sometimes. Now, what do we have here? We have promising farmlands. This is a blighted land, so there's actually only going to be 1 more still healthy card. I'll point it out when we get there. Otherwise, assume these are all blighted island cards. Promising farmlands. Immediately on each board, add a town and a city to an inland land with no buildings. 4 blight per player. So this is going to basically add 5 power and health, if we use the same kind of sort of metric that we were using before there. So it's sort of between that 4 and 6 that we saw before. But this is putting it in a single land, which is a lot better than putting it in 3 or 4 lands. So this one is reasonably favorable. This is definitely not, this is a sometimes. This is not a rarely. That's what I'm saying. I'm skipping the rarely because I think a lot of these are just straight into sometimes. So this one is not too bad. A lot better than the ones that we just talked about there. So I quite like this one for the most part, but sometimes it wrecks you. You know, there are times in the game where it happens late on and you've got a plan and you're pushing for a victory, and, you know, you've almost got all the cities off the board and you're just getting over the line for the win. This thing flips and it throws your plans out the window. So sometimes it can wreck you. But for the most part, just kind of affecting 1 single land, not too bad. Usually doable. Next. Shattered Fragments of Power. Immediately draw 1 major power card per spirit plus 2 more. Each spirit takes 1 and gains 2 energy. And that's an important word there, takes 1 as opposed to gains it, so you don't have to forget for this, which is quite nice. And then, of course, you discard the 2 unselected cards. And this is a 2 blight per player card. So this is very much akin to the minor power variant of this. So this came out in Nature Incarnate here, and we do, of course, have Aid from Lesser Spirits, which we've seen on the channel already, which is the kind of minor variant of this, and we'll get to it when we get to it. This is the kind of major version of that. So again, draw 1 major power card per player plus 2 more. So if 1 player is playing, you look at 3, and then you get to pick 1, and you get it without forgetting, and you get 2 energy. Really nice effect. But only two blight per player. And for me, this is in the sometimes only, because there will be some games where this is amazing, and there will be some games when it does almost nothing. Yes, 2 energy is nice, but 2 energy is not worth a card that has 2 blight per player. And there will be plenty of games where you look at this and you just go, I'm never playing the major I just got. It's useless. Either I can't afford it, or it does nothing for me, or contextually for the game, it doesn't work, or it doesn't fit in my kit, it's not my elements, whatever. Or I already have a major power that I've reclaimed looping, so I don't need it anyway, and there's all this kind of stuff. So there's plenty of games where this will flip and it'd be like, just does nothing for me. So it's a sometimes for me, for that reason. Power corrodes the spirit. 4 blight per player this time. Each invader phase. Each spirit destroys 1 of their presence if they have 3 or more power cards in play, or have a power card in play costing 4 or more printed energy. So this is one of numerous variants. It's the first one we've seen so far that's essentially going to make you destroy a presence every turn. There's a bunch of them in here. I have them rated slightly differently. I have this one rated lowest, because it only gives you 4 blight per player, and it kind of forces you to lose a presence every turn. there are not going to be that many circumstances where you don't qualify for either of these things, because it punishes you for having a minor strategy and it punishes you for having a major strategy. So yes, there are ways to play around this, but honestly, don't. If you're finding yourselves getting to a point in the game where you're purposely underplaying or purposely not playing your major power so that you want to save an extra presence, that's a losing play in my mind. So this is just one that it almost just reads each invader phase, each spirit destroys a presence, full stop. And it's only 4 blight per player, which is the reason why I have this rated so lowly, because the other ones generally give you more blight per player. That's that one. Now, the last still healthy island card here, the border of life and death, and this is one with only one with one blight on it. So I knew there was at least one. So this is only giving you 1 blight per player, and this says, now and each invader phase until this card is flipped, each spirit with at least 2 presence on the island destroys 1 presence and may discard a power card to gain 1 energy. So each spirit with at least 2 presence on the island is essentially saying Volcano doesn't lose the game when this card flips. That's pretty much all this is saying, and that's fine. So essentially, again, similar to Power Crowds, the one previous, as long as this card is still showing, every invader phase, and now and each invader phase, you are going to destroy a presence, and you may discard a power card to gain an energy. So again, this is guaranteeing you a presence loss while it's there. It's not going to stay around for long. That's the first thing. Usually this thing comes out, it's only got 1 blight per player. Oftentimes you'll be in the middle of a ravage. You'll flip the card, 1 blight per player goes on it, and then you place another couple of blight and then just goes away. So it's kind of like a passing thing very often. I'm sometimes happy to see this because a lot of games you play, 1 presence isn't worth that much and you can just kind of throw it away. But sometimes you're kind of at the end of your reclaim cycle and you're like, actually, that one power card is amazing, or that 1 energy is amazing. I've only got 1 card left in my hand. I'm going to reclaim next turn anyway. I'll just discard this one right now to get 1 energy. And that can change your whole game, because now you get to reclaim and do something different that you weren't planning on doing, or you can just about afford your major power or something like that. So that can actually come up and it can be quite nice. Now, the last one I'm sometimes happy to see is intensifying exploitation. Ongoing, starting next turn, thankfully. During ravage actions, invaders deal +2 damage to the land. This is a 5 blight per player card. It's the first one we've seen so far, and this one this one can really sting. +2 damage on every ravage is essentially Habsburg Livestock level 6 that we've talked about in this game, permanently on every land. So this can really, really hurt. The reason I didn't put this one in the rarely happy to see in the bottom category is there will be games where you can just play around this, where you're in a kind of stage of the game where you've kind of, let's say the second half of your stage 2 cards, you're in that phase of the game where you've kind of outpaced the tempo of the invaders. Your growth has kind of outscaled them, and you're in that kind of almost middle portion of the game where you're getting towards the end of your stage 2s, you're stronger than the invaders, and then you haven't quite gotten to the stage 3 yet, so you're kind of controlling the board. And yes, stage 3 will come and eventually they'll get back in the game. But you'll often flip this around about that time, because that's kind of where you often will flip your blight card, and you'll have maybe a turn, maybe 2, maybe even 3, where you have control of the board. It's not going to happen every time, of course it won't, but there will be plenty of games where that does happen, and you can shut down the cards that are the lands that are about to ravage. You're playing ahead of tempo. You've taken blight to scale, and now you're ahead of tempo with the invaders, and you've accepted a blight card flipping, but you've gotten ahead of the tempo of the invaders, so you've shut down the builds, you've emptied the lands, there's no ravages next turn, or maybe even the following turn, and then this card flips, and it's like, okay, it's not going to do anything for about 2 turns, and by the time it does start doing things, I've got 5 blight in the card. Plenty enough. So that's one of them where it can go either way, which is why I put it in sometimes. Yes, against Habsburg, that's one of them ones to look out for. it could make your Habsburg loss condition really, really bad. So this could be awful to flip against Habsburg. But again, just like I said, there will be games where you're ahead of the tempo of Habsburg. You've gotten a handle on what's going on the board, and it's not going to matter that much. Okay, that's our sometimes. Now we're going to A tier, and this is the usually happy to see tier. What do we have in here? Aid from lesser spirits. We talked about it already. Now, there are 3 2 blight per player cards here, and I'm going to do them back to back, and I'll say the same comment for all of them right now. These almost belong in their own tier. The tier of they break the game tier. If you flip one of these in a spot where you're quite stable on the board and you're not due to take much more blight for the next couple of turns, these will all win you the game. All 3 of the cards I'm just about to read here. They're all the 2 blight per player ones. The major power one I threw away because, as I say, it's too contextual. But the 3 of these, the other 3, are all broken. The reason they don't go in the top tier, the always happy to see tier, is because sometimes you just don't have a good handle on your board and you're due to take a bit more blight, and then these are a bit dicey. So that's why I can't put them in the top tier, but they almost belong in their own tier, which is the broken tier. Aid from lesser spirits. Immediately draw 1 minor power card per player plus 1 more. Give 1 to each spirit. They may be used every turn as if played, but cost no card plays and no energy, and place the unselected cards in the minor powers discard pile. Essentially, everybody gets a lovely toy. You get a lovely toy that sits in front of you for the rest of the game. It contributes elements towards your innates. It helps you threshold majors. If it's a slow power that you pick, you can use it this turn, most likely if you blighted during the Ravage. You can combo it with your other cards. It's if you hit one of the broken cards like Constancy or one of the support cards, that doesn't even matter if it's your elements, but it's a broken thing like a Gift of Twin Days or a Gift of Nature's Connection. Like we had this in one of the games where I flipped over Spur on with Words of Fire, and it was insane. So this Aid from Lesser Spirits, it's probably the most powerful of the entire lot. But as I say, sometimes you'll be in trouble with the number of blight. Next one is Back Against the Wall, and this is every spirit phase. Each spirit gains +1 energy and +1 card play, and for almost the exact same reasons as Aid from Lesser Spirits, this is broken. It gives you extra plays, it helps you threshold majors, it helps you hit minors, it gives you extra effects on the board, gives you lets you donate support effects much more powerfully. It's just a whole bunch of good stuff. Finally, Burn Brightest Before the End, the other 2 per player card, which came out in Nature Incarnate. Immediately, each spirit adds 1 presence to one of their lands or removes 1 presence from the presence track. And then removed presence goes to the destroyed presence supply. Essentially, get a free proliferate right now. Absolutely broken for all the reasons the proliferate is broken, and much the same reasons as the previous 2 cards I just talked about there. In some ways, Back Against the Wall gives you even more, because Burn Brightest Before the End, 1 proliferate will often give you either an extra card play or an extra energy. Back Against the Wall gives you both. So it's one of them where contextually for the game, one of these might be better than the other, but they're all super, super strong, super broken. And as I say, if you're on a stable board, when you flip any of them, the game's over usually. So that's all of them. Now, 5 blight per player. We're back to 5 blight per player. Downward Spiral. Another one that I'm usually reasonably happy to see. At the start of each invader phase, each spirit destroys 1 of their presence. Now, there are some games where this card hurts like hell. I am not saying that those games don't exist. They do. There are some spirits that just hate playing against this card, and one of my favorites is Volcano Looming High. When I'm playing Volcano, I hate flipping this card, and actually there's a number of them there that all do a very similar thing, and I hate flipping that card with any of those spirits. Fangs is another one. Fractured Day, Split the Sky is another one. There's a number of spirits in this game that like playing a game with very few presents on the board, and flipping Downward Spiral with those spirits hurts a lot. So it's not an always, not by a long shot. but I'm usually happy to see it because there are plenty of spirits in this game that have plenty of presence on the board, and they will be just fine with spending the next 3 or so turns just throwing away one during at the beginning of each invader phase. And by the way, it is the start of each invader phase, so it's not even now. It'll only happen next turn, so it's usually fine. And of course, it gives you 5 blight per player, which is why I have this in the category above the other one. What was it? Where's the card gone? That's gone. Can't remember where it is. In the previous category, because that only gave you 4 blight per player and did almost the exact same thing. Now, memory fades to dust. Another similar effect here. This is at the start of each invader phase. Each spirit forgets a power or destroys one of their presence. So similarly to Downward Spiral, you can play this as though you just destroy a presence every single turn. It's 4 blight per player, so it's 1 less than Downward Spiral. And this is, by the way, I've just done back-to-back the 2 blight cards that were in the original base game. So Downward Spiral and Memory Fades, they're the 2 original ones. Memory Fades gives you a choice, however. You can destroy a presence or you can forget a power card. And that is a huge choice. Usually, most spirits will find a way to really leverage that choice to their advantage. And I'd almost go as far as to say this Memory Fades should be in the top category, the always happy to see. It feels like it belongs a category above Downward Spiral to me, so I might have misplaced this. In hindsight, this one may belong in the tier above, but we'll keep it here for now. Usually a good one. Usually you can find a way to play around it. Next, Slow Dissolution of Will. Another card that's going to destroy our presence every turn, but in a slightly different way. Immediately, each spirit chooses one of Badlands, Beasts, or Wilds. And then you put some of the chosen tokens next to your spirit panel as a reminder. Each invader phase, each spirit replaces one of their presence with their chosen type of spirit token, and essentially the presence is destroyed. It goes to the destroyed supply, so it can't be returned later. Now this is only 3 blight per player. So again, similar to the ones we just talked about, where it's going to kind of destroy your presence every turn, but instead of destroying the presence, it's going to replace it with a token of your choice. Now, important here, do bear in mind, you have to pick the chosen token when this flips, and that you're stuck with that token. If you could choose between these 3 tokens, this would certainly be in consideration for the single strongest blighted card in the whole game. This would be broken. But you have to choose now. So you don't get the best decision contextually each turn. Now, I'm pretty sure when I've played with this, every single time I've played with this, I've chosen Badlands, because as it's happened, every time it's come up, I've been playing with a spirit that really used Badlands very well. I did hear on a podcast recently, I believe it was the Spirited Discussion podcast, the guys had Arya Fireheart on, and Arya was talking about this card and saying that by far the best choice on this card is the Wilds, because essentially a Wilds solves a land. Doesn't solve every land, but it can solve a land in a way that the other 2 can't. So if you can find a way to get that to your advantage and kind of every turn move a presence into an empty land, and then at the beginning of the invader phase, sacrifice that presence, put a Wilds in there, and then kind of solve the land for the next explorer, that can be really strong. So there are ways, I think, to really leverage this card, and again, I think it's one of them that in hindsight could perhaps have gone into the top category, but the fact that it destroys your presence every turn and only gives you 3 blight per player, I felt it kept it slightly out of that top category. Final card now in this category is All Things Weaken, and as I know some people absolutely hate this card, but I actually quite like it, and this came up for me in my playthrough against Habsburg, which is why it was fresh in my mind, and I enjoyed it quite a bit in that game. Ongoing, starting next turn, invaders and Dahan have -1 health, minimum of 1, and the land takes blight on 1 less damage, which normally means a single point of damage will be enough to blight the land. And then when you add blight, it destroys all presence and beasts in that land and 1 presence total in an adjacent land. So this absolutely wrecks everything. This is just like the nuke card. Everything gets weak, and the land gets weak. Blight is everywhere. Invaders are weak. The Han are weak. The whole lot. It's super fun. Is this super strong? Does this belong in the usually happy to see for power levels of the same other cards I just talked about there? Maybe, maybe not. it's tough. It is tricky, but the -1 health on everything is amazing. So if you're playing a game where, again, if you're playing ahead of tempo with the invaders, if you've got a good handle on your board, if you've kind of stabilized the board and you're waiting to turn the corner, and you just weren't quite sure, maybe you didn't quite find the major that you kind of needed so far, or you're in that sort of mid-game spot again, like I talked about, where you've kind of outscaled the invaders. If this thing flips, you can turn all of your little pings of damage into town kills or city kills. If you can combo with loads of other cards that do like 1 damage to everything, it just does so many good things. All of your little fear cards that do like 1 ping for the hand, all that kind of stuff, they all start to just wreck invaders. So I love playing against this card. It's so much fun to play with as well. So this is one of them where I'm usually happy to see it because it's a really fun game. And if you saw the playthrough, you saw my reaction when that card flipped. I laughed and I went, well, things are going to get crazy one way or another. So I do love playing with it. That's that category. Now, finally, S tier. Let's talk about S tier. These are the always happy to see. And again, do bear in mind, of course, there will be corner cases where these cards can sometimes be bad, but generally speaking, I'm always happy when I flip these cards. Let's go, one by one. Blight corrodes the spirit. 4 blight per player. Each invader phase, and again, that's the start of the invader phase, so if this is during the Ravage, this will not happen until next turn. On each board, destroy a presence in a land with blight. So again, similar to what we talked about before, it's a card that destroys presence each turn, and it's on each board. So again, if you're spread out across multiple boards, this can hit multiple spirits. So that's something to bear in mind, but you do have agency involved. And sometimes this will just do very, very little because it's destroy presence in a land with blight. And very often, if there's blight in a land, that meant that a Ravage got through and your presence was destroyed anyway. So there will be some games where this comes up and it does almost nothing, and it gives you 4 blight per player for that. There will be other games where you've got blight all over the place and presence all over the place, and this will wreck you, and that can happen. But very often, I'd say the average case is you'll probably take a blight, maybe, or you'll probably take a presence loss, maybe 2, and then you just don't put any more into those lands, and then you're pretty okay with it. So usually happy to see that one. Next, attenuated essence, 4 blight per player. Again, each invader phase, each spirit with at least 5 presence on the island destroys 1 presence. Again, very similar. It's a thing that destroys your presence each turn, but it's going to do a check for 5 presence. And this will not wreck Volcano quite as much as the other ones will, which is why I put this one probably in the always happy to see here. So it's slightly less damaging. The cards like a Downward Spiral are just going to wreck you no matter what. Whereas this is like, okay, well, if you're wrecked enough and you're kind of low on presence right now, and you're stuck in a reclaim loop, and you're starting to kind of run out of presence placement, we won't keep wrecking you into the ground. We'll stop once you have kind of 4 presence only left. So I quite like it for that reason as well. Now, next, unnatural proliferation, and I love this one. Immediately, each spirit adds 1 presence to a land with their presence, so you get a proliferation, which is just, as we said, amazing. On each board, add a Dahan to a land with a Dahan. Oh my god, you're also giving me a Dahan? That's amazing. What the hell else? What's going to go wrong here? And add 2 cities to the land with the fewest buildings. Okay, so there's your there's your downside. There's your sort of 6 power and health that we talked about. Again, we're using that metric from before, right? So the 6 was kind of one of your worst case scenarios from before, and here's the 6 again. And this is only a 3 blight per player card, which is quite low, but it gives you a proliferation and it gives you a Dahan, which is usually amazing. This is one of the best ones, I think. This is certainly one of the best ones in the deck, and I'm almost always delighted to see it. Erosion of Will. Immediately 2 fear per player. Each spirit destroys 1 of their presence and loses 1 energy. 3 blight per player. Okay, 2 fear per player, pretty good. Each spirit destroys a presence, but it's only once, and loses 1 energy. And you don't even lose an energy if you don't have one in your pool. So yes, there will be times when you get wrecked by this, when you have a very, very carefully crafted plan, which you often do, let's be fair. there will be often things where you're like, okay, this is this turn. Next turn, I have exactly enough energy to do that. Okay. And you kind of have your plan, and then this comes over and you lose in energy and you get wrecked. It does happen. It absolutely does happen. But it gives you 2 fear per player for your troubles, which can often kind of give you, an extra fear card or something like that. It just it's 3 fear per player, which is on the low side for sure, but it's one and done. Which I quite like, and I just find that's one of them where when it comes up, I often just shrug my shoulders and go, "Yeah, fair enough." It's not adding any plastic to the board. It's not adding blight to the board. I lose a presence, which, as I say, for the most part, most spirits can be kind of shrug and just go, "Okay, fine," and you move on with life. Now, last 3, and then we're done with all of this. Appall upon the land, 3 blight per player. Immediately on each board, destroy a presence and remove a town. Huge. Absolutely huge. I love this card. I always love when I draw this card. Comfortably one of the best ones in the deck by far. And again, destroy a present. You do it once, you usually don't care, and you're usually absolutely delighted to have that remove a town, because that can be any town on the board, and that can often be massive. And if you saw my playthrough, you will see that when I was flipping the blight card, this was the card I was hoping to hit. I actually crafted my ravage, where I played it in such a way where I took a blight in one spot and I left one ravage on the other side of the board. And if I flipped this card, it would have been huge, because it would have turned off the adjacent +2 damage and all that kind of stuff. So I often find myself flipping the blight card and hoping that it's this card. So really, really good, really strong. Disintegrating ecosystem, 5 blight per player this time. Immediately on each board, destroy a beast, then add a blight to a land with buildings. Again, it's a one and done. It adds a blight onto the board, which hurts. And it destroys a beast, which most of the time you're okay with. If you're a beast spirit, sometimes there will be you'll be disappointed in losing a beast here. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the background here. I'm not sure how with that this is gonna test my mic, whether you're picking all that stuff in the background. It's distracting me. Someone right outside my door shouting and making noise. So hopefully that doesn't last for too long. Immediately on each board, as I say, yeah, if you're a beast spirit, sometimes it'll hurt, but you can kind of afford it. A lot of other spirits are just like, yeah, whatever, I'll lose the beast. It's not the end of the world. There are some events that do it anyway. And yes, sometimes that'll create a blight cascade. In hindsight, this is another one that maybe I would have slightly downgraded. That one maybe belonged in the tier below, into the usually happy, but there are sometimes where I get wrecked by that one. So I'd say, yeah, in hindsight, let's downgrade that one. And then finally, and by the way, I pointed that I had that actually marked as one that could be interesting against Habsburg for a similar reason before, where that could actually sometimes give you the extra blight you need to turn off durable, to put you above the threshold for the escalations and all that kind of stuff. Finally, we're over 2 hours in, and I will just get to the end of my my segment now, which is untended land crumbles, and this is 4 blight per player, and it is each invader phase on each board. Add a blight to a land adjacent to blight. Ugh. Each invader phase, each board. Spirits may prevent this on any and all boards. Each board to be protected requires jointly paying 3 energy or destroying 1 presence from that board. So, there's a lot of text on this card. A lot of time, this is going to read each invader phase. Each spirit destroys 1 presence. Done. And we talked about already that's in that kind of 4 and 5 blight per player range. This is a 4 blight per player card, by the way. So similar to the downward spiral and the other ones, you can just read the card like every spirit phase, destroy a presence, and you're done. But it gives you options. If I don't want to destroy a presence, I can sometimes add a blight to a land adjacent to blight. If I've got a safe land there, yeah, why not? I'll just add a blight over there, no big deal. Against Habsburg, maybe that's even a good thing. Or maybe sometimes I've got infinite energy. Maybe Numinous Crisis just came up and I've got 1,000,000 energy. Or maybe I've hit the 9 button with shifting memory or something like that, and I'm flush with cash, and I can pay 3 energy instead of doing either of those two things. Now, how often you're going to pay that 3 energy? Almost never, but it has come up. I do remember playing as Volcano when this card flipped, and I had to pay the 3 energy, and I remember that stung really, really badly. But it's one of them where you've got 3 different options to do that, and that for me has got to be going into the always happy to see category. That's our blight cards. That took way longer than I thought. Probably we didn't intend on spending as long with that, but hopefully that was enjoyable. And I would love to hear from people on how well you agree or disagree with all of that. But that's going to be a moment for me to stop and have a beer. Absolutely, for sure. They're your blight cards. Know them. Get comfortable with them. Don't be afraid to flip the blight card. That is the number one takeaway from this little segment on your very good. Be comfortable with blight. Be happy with blight. Know those cards. Don't be afraid to see them when they flip over, and just get your blight on the board. Now, next up, let's keep going. Very good. Stop the builds. Somebody asked the question earlier on, is it worth stopping the build when they're going to just gather the town in after the fact? And the answer is a resounding yes. You need to keep the towns at bay. We talked about it, containment earlier on, and that kind of process of trying to keep the board under control. Every single town matters against Habsburg Livestock, and I can't stress that enough. Every one single town makes a difference in beating this adversary. You have to stop the builds. How do you stop builds? Well, it's the usual story. Explorer control, isolate, the usual stuff. Really, really strong into this adversary. Yes, towns are the problem. Yes, they're the things you need to kill, but do not be afraid to dedicate actions to isolating and explorer control, because they're both really strong. As I say, every single town matters. And of course it matters because it gets gathered around, they're adjacent to lands, they give you the +2, all of that kind of stuff. So you have to keep them off. And especially, you absolutely, it's imperative, especially during the first 3 to 4 turns of the game, you have to stop that double town build. You know, instead that rule where it says instead of a city, it builds 2 towns. My God, please do everything in your power to stop that from happening. And that's where your town control is going to come in here. So we'll talk about that in a second. But well, like I said, for now, ignore your ravages. Said it already. Those first couple of turns, put the ravages aside. Take 4 blight and flip the blight card if you have to. And use that tempo to stay ahead of the invaders. And to get ahead of them and to stay ahead of them. Now, we're still on very good. That was a very good. The next thing is also very good. Town control. And I said here in brackets, not damage. Town control is key against this adversary. Much better than 2 damage or destroy a town is moving towns. So first of all, you've no durable issues, of course. So yes, later in the game, your town damage is going to be fine, but early on in the game, it won't be. So if you're moving town, you won't have the durable issue. As we said, prevent the builds and prevent the ravages, which is really, really good. Now, again, prevent ravages. It's not your priority earlier in the game, but you will need it. But preventing that build, especially preventing that double town build, absolutely key. So move your towns. And of course, prevent the level 6 adjacencies, which reduces the lost condition ravages. Absolutely key. Now, I had another segment here that I was going to do, and I'm not really going to do it now because we're already going far too late. But I had a bunch of cards that I have here in my hand. This is every card in the minor power deck that can push a town or gather a town, essentially that can move a town. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 cards. So 16 out of the 100 minor powers can move towns. All of them have a use against Habsburg. Keep an eye out for them. They're potential. Some of them are excellent, obviously. Some of them not so excellent, but they're all going to have some amount of utility against Habsburg. So keep them closely in mind. I'll go through and I'll name them, and I might bring them up on the screen here, but I'm not doing any kind of deep dive on them. Land of Haunts and Embers we already talked about because that was the blight one. 9 root biters, one of the worst cards in the whole deck, but it absolutely does have use against Habsburg, and that's not a that is not a slight on the 9 root biters, the content creators in Spirit Island. Those guys are super cool. Cool name, not such a good card. Gold's Allure, good one. Call to Isolation's broken anyway, but again, really good here. Weep for What Is Lost, blight related, so that one could be nice. Enticing Splendor, that was one I was saying earlier on that I couldn't remember the name of, that has the restriction on no blight, but again, it can gather towns, which is good news. Lure of the Unknown, we've talked about that one plenty, as a nice tempo card here, works really good here as well, especially because later on in the game you gather your towns around and you pull them away from lands, so that can actually still be relevant as the game goes on. Call to Ferocity, Flow Down River, Blow Down Wind, another really good one I think into Habsburg. That's not such a super good card usually, but I think quite a good card against Habsburg. There's a couple there, those range 0 ones like Shadows of the Burning Forest. Here there'll be Monsters, Strong and Constant Current. Some of those where you have to be in the land with them can get a little bit dicey, of course, because of blight, but still absolutely fine. Visions of Fiery Doom is a similar one. Like Calls to Like, we joked about this before, being the little brother to Lure's card, which is Softly Beckon Ever Inward, which is a broken card and super strong into Habsburg, but like Calls to Like could do something. Call to Trade is a dodgy one, and it came up in my game against Habsburg, and I was very much hesitant to put that extra build, because that is one that adds two towns with the build. But if you think you have a solution to kind of deal with them later on after the fact, that can still be worth it. Finally, Confounding Mists, which is a card that can let the build happen and then kind of push stuff out after the build happens. So there's all those 16. I was going to spend a bit more time on them, but given that we've kind of spent a lot longer on the blight portion than I expected, I sort of skipped through them there. But look, they are what they are. They're the cards. As I say, I'll bring them up on the screen. But if you're listening through the audio platform, that probably wasn't an overly interesting or useful segment, and I apologize to you. Now, that was very good. We're still on very good here. Plan for the migrating towns. My God, please plan for these. And this is what I talked about earlier on in the episode. You cannot be in reactionary mode against Habsburg. You have to be planning for where those towns migrate. Not just this turn, next turn, and even the following turn after. And again, if you haven't watched my playthrough, I'm going to link it later on in the episode when we get to the segment for it. But if you go there and watch how I play against Habsburg, every turn I'm thinking, which towns are migrating this turn? Where are they migrating to? What's building this turn? What are the options for next turn? What are the possible explorers next turn? And where can they go? And what can the movement look like then? You'll see, for example, I played with the card Voice of Command, and later on in the game, I was using Voice of Command to kind of do that gather. You know, the Voice of Command has the threshold effect that can gather 2 towns. I was using that a bunch to kind of pull the towns back out of the lands after they migrated into them. And you can see me like 2 turns in advance, I'm already moving Dahan to get them into the proper land so that I can start using that threshold later on. So I'm like planning 2 turns in advance with the migration of the thing. And if you do that, you will get on top of this adversary. If you know where those towns are going, it's half the battle, because then you can start to do things like, okay, the +2 Ravage, does it matter, does it not? Where do I need to isolate? And where can I kill towns after they go into a blighted land versus when they get pulled out of a blighted land, and all of that kind of finicky stuff that looks really, really challenging up front. When you read this adversary first and start playing against them first, it becomes a lot more manageable when you know where they're moving. So that's that. And that's the always plan. A couple of other things I wrote here, some gather tricks. So because of the board land order stuff that we talked about before, you can do things like sometimes a board topology and a layout will allow you to, in your lower number land, pull a town away so that the second higher number land has no remaining town to gather. That will actually come up a lot, so do keep an eye out for that one. And you won't always necessarily want to do it that way, but there are spots where you can do things like, I'll gather into the first land, I'll make that a big problem, and I'll deal with that big problem, but then the second land will no longer have an adjacent town, so it doesn't gather. And to that end, prioritize removing key towns on your board, and this obviously plays into the planning, so you know exactly which one of your towns are the most key. And sometimes that will be in a non-active land. And this is one of the adversaries, it might be the only adversary, where I will frequently do this, and I'll advocate for others doing it, where you will target kind of non-active lands, and I use that term to mean essentially any land that's not ravaging or building, where you'll target one of those non-active lands to destroy buildings, to destroy towns, so that you can't then gather into the other lands. So again, that's your planning for that. And sometimes you'll set up maybe a slow card where after the fact, something will gather, and then you kind of kill towns in non-active lands to kind of prevent some of the stuff from the next turn once you see where the explorers happened. Isolate to prevent movement. Another one that's key in here. Again, planning for the migrating towns. Use your isolation to prevent that as much as you can. And then the other thing that somebody already mentioned earlier in the episode, I'll just reiterate here, is use the gather against them. So if you can, do things like fast damage before they get pulled into a blighted land, and then they just die automatically on arrival. A good example of this is the snake right innate. Where you do the serpent right innate, where you go deal 2 damage to a town, a durable town, and then the second level of the thing pushes the town, and then you can push it into a blighted land, and then it dies immediately on arrival. So there's plenty of little tricks like that you can do. Now, that's all your very goods. Now we get to goods. Scale your spirits. Talked about this earlier on. I'm reiterating it again here. I'm doing a lot of reiteration here. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe that's just poor planning on my part. I'm doing too much planning for my grading towns and not enough planning for my segment here, but hopefully it's okay. Scale your spirits. Okay. Take blight to scale. Now, I've said this a million times, but this is important. This term, I think I might have covered this in the HME episode. I can't remember because you do the exact same thing against HME, but I'm going to say it here. Taking blight to scale is a term in this game that gets thrown around, and I feel gets used incorrectly quite a lot. For me, the term taking blight to scale means I can deal with that problem, and I'm choosing not to. I'm instead taking the blight so that I can scale my spirit. I can put my attention on other things. So again, what does that mean? Usually, concretely here, this means the first ravage and the second ravage that are coming through, letting most of that in so that you can turn your attention to other things later and get ahead of tempo. Take the blight to scale. Now, other things here about scaling. Use play patterns to stretch out your reclaim. I think we've mentioned this in a previous episode. I'll mention it again here. What do those look like? Underplay. If you've got a turn where you're ahead of tempo, we just said it there, I've taken those blight to scale. I'm ahead of tempo. How do I push the advantage? How do I really push that scaling through? Maybe I'll just underplay for a turn. Play 1 card. Play 0 cards. Take a growth that does a double present placement. Set myself up for next turn. Underplay. Now, card gain drafts and growths. Anything that can gain you cards is a way to scale. So a lot of the times it'll look like a growth option. Place a presence, gain a card. That kind of thing. Great for scaling. It gives you more cards in your hand. It reduces the number of times you need to reclaim loop. And of course, things like gifted power, minor power that does it. There's plenty of other spirits that have those cards in their hand. That the shifting memory has a boon of ancient memories, a whole bunch of others that can give you ways to draft more cards. Get greedy with them, play them as much as you can. Support powers is the last thing that really help you stretch out a reclaim and really help you scale your spirit. All those things that we talked about, gifted power just mentioned is one. There's plenty of other ways to do it where you basically can use support cards. Gifted constancy is the perfect example for this. Cards back in your hand so that you don't have to reclaim. It gives you an extra turn to stretch that reclaim. Things even like gifted living energy gives you energy so that you don't have to use your energy spiking growth option that gives you like your +2 or your +3 energy. Instead, you focus on stretching out, maybe unlocking an extra card play so that when you reclaim next turn, you're in a more powerful state. Those kind of things. And actually, the next point I have on my list here is avoid those temporary buff growth options. I mentioned earlier in the episode the 9 energy spike for shifting memory. It's terrible. I've done it like maybe 2 or 3 total times in all of my times that I've played that spirit. It's not good. It can enable some powerful things, and you'll use it the very odd time. But every time you use that, that's sacrificing some of your scaling and growth for the future. So avoid, if you can, those short-term buffs. And Lure of the Deep Wilderness is a perfect example of this. Lure has that option, the G3, which is the it gives you a +2 energy, and it gives you 1 element for the turn. The very definition of short term. There's no stretch out. There's no growth. There's no long term implication for a thing like that. It's very short term focus. So try to avoid those if you can. And finally, then the last thing here is don't chase solutions early. Is what I've written here. First of all, this can look like reclaim looping. If I have a solution, I'm chasing it. I'm chasing after it. It's a skip. I've got a Ravage skip in my kit. I need it again. I want to stop that lost condition Ravage. I need to keep reclaim looping. Okay, so that's one way where this can go wrong. The other way is, generally speaking, you can use almost anything in this game to stop the lost condition Ravage. Just one example. You're panicking. You're chasing for a solution. A defend 2. Push an explorer. Isolate a land. Like, probably about 2/3 of that whole minor deck can stop a lost condition Ravage. You don't have to stop the whole Ravage. You only need to get it below 8, and that is key. Someone else earlier on in this episode talked about they find themselves defend 4, defend 5, and then the blight still comes through. They just did enough to stop the Ravage. That's not a problem. As far as I'm concerned, that is actually a pretty good play pattern against this adversary, especially in those early turns. Make sure you stop the lost condition Ravage. That's absolutely critical. Don't let them in if you can afford it. But do not be panicking and running around trying to find ways to stop all of the incoming damage, when sometimes a 0-cost card that pushes 1 explorer will be enough. That's that. Now, very quickly moving from that into my next thing here, which is still again on the good side. This is prevent lost condition. Now, straight up front, of course, preventing the lost condition is critical against this adversary. So, you could put this in the very good category. The reason I'm putting it in the good category is more because I don't want everyone to do that kind of panicky deer in the headlights thing I just talked about, where you feel like you have to stop every point of damage coming in. Not the case, right? So things like skips. Most people will say skips are very strong against Habsburg Livestock. They are. But a little bit similar to what we talked about last time out with HME. Not quite the same, because in HME, I think they're actually on the weaker end. Against Habsburg, they're probably still on the stronger end because they stopped the lost condition. But then you don't have to have a skip. Like I said, some of those little small effects. Maybe you have a spirit that wants to play a lot of cards, a lot of minors. Go for a big innate. We talked about that as a good strategy against HME. I'm going to go bottom track. I'm going to play millions of minors. I'm going to do loads of little bits and pieces of stuff, and I'm going to build up to a big damage innate. Well, what do your bits and pieces look like? Are they stopping 10 incoming blight? No, but they stopped 3. Hey, actually, that's enough. So there, you see, you don't need skips. You don't need big 4 and 5 cost skips. 3 and 4 and 5 cost skips. Yes, skips are good, but generally later in the game is better. Don't be panicking and running around trying to find them early in the game if it doesn't fit your play, your growth pattern. And then the last thing, as I said, from preventing the lost condition, oftentimes isolate will be enough. Turn off the adjacency, turn off the traveling lands, keep isolating your kid. It's really strong. Now, still on the good here, we're nearly there. There's a lot of really good things against this adversary. Go tall as a strategy. Counter attack with your majors and your innates. Counter attack. Let them attack and then counter attack. It's not about prevention. Not early in the game. It's about allowing enough to happen, scale yourself up, and go tall. Wide, not necessarily. Tall is good, but the timing is really important. So I did already say earlier in the episode, making big clumped up lands is a challenge against this adversary. That's not to say it can't be done. And of course, some spirits will be better than others. The likes of River, the likes of Finder. Some of those spirits are going to be really good at clumping stuff up, and that is good news if you can find that big hammer. We talked about them already. Sweeping to the Sea, the Jungle Hungers, a whole bunch of them, not Blazing Renewal, categorically not Blazing Renewal, but you get the point. Get your lands, get the timing right, and then blow up a big land, and it can be huge because that can turn off so many adjacencies with your towns there. And do remember, of course, the reminder card. That happens on turn after the turn 4 Explore. So it's the 5th total Explore, but of course one of them is your opening Explore, and the other one also happens on turn 1. So on turn 4 of the game, after the Explore, that's when your reminder card hits. And if you can find a key moment in the game then to play a big nuke, maybe wipe out the city land if that's the way your game's going, that kind of thing, that can really get you, ahead in the game. But do bear in mind here, and I haven't really talked about it now, but it's something to consider. Don't panic. When that reminder card hits, it's business as usual. The exact same strategies and tactics that I've talked about until this moment in the episode are exactly the same thing to follow once that reminder card hits. Usually, it's, as somebody joked earlier on, you forget about it. You're going, yep, happy days, got things under control and preventing all my migrating. I know where they're going, I know what's going on, and then, bam, Explore card hits, the thing comes over, and it happens to me all the time. I go, oh yeah, I forgot that was this turn. And you place your stuff out and you go, okay, right, I'm actually all right here. I've got it. And you kind of recoup and you recover. And then again, Habsburg gets back into the same pattern. They kind of sort, in many ways, themselves out. And it's still true after that reminder card hits. They still go back into the same pattern. They go back into this pattern of build, gather, and they sort of move the pieces around themselves. And again, you go back to what we said before, which is using that to your advantage and using it against them. We're nearly there. Neutral, fear. Again, somebody already said it. Keep the cities off the board. Aim for your terror level 3 win. It's absolutely true, and I'll certainly back that up. But do bear in mind, it does take a long time, as I said. So it's 11 cards to get there for a terror level 3 to reach the terror level 3. Whereas for all the other adversaries, I've counted them, and of the 7 other adversaries, it takes 8, 8, 9, 9, 9, 10, and 12. There's only one other adversary, and that's Scotland, that starts with a 6 and a 6 in the first two levels. But Habsburg are second of the 8, so it's quite a lot. Bear it in mind. And the other thing as well about fear is, I kind of talked about it already in the segment of how do you lose to these. You can't ignore the board. Going all in, rushing fear. You will lose to the lost condition ravages. You know this kind of style of we've all been there. I'm panicking. I'm losing control of the board. I can't keep them contained. I'm just going to ignore everything that's happening, and I'm just going to play a load of fear cards, and I'm just going to try rush fear. You will lose to the lost condition ravages because at that stage in the game there's going to be loads of plastic, and one turn will be all it takes. It's not like something like England or a bunch of other adversaries where you can kind of just go, I'm just going to let every ravage in for the next 2 turns, and I've got like 7 blight left on the card. I've calculated it. I think I take 6, and then I finally win at the end. You can't quite do that against this adversary because you'll just immediately lose to the lost condition before you've lost to the amount of blight on the card. So do bear that in mind. Now, I think this is the last one. We've got a bad, and then we've got a very bad. Defend and the hand. We talked about them already being bad. They just ravage for too much. We already talked about the hand counterattacks and why those get weak. But do consider here there are 1 or 2 cards in the game. Something like Bird's Cry Warning is actually quite a bit better, I would say, usually, than trying to do the defend and the hand thing. Because Bird's Cry Warning will allow you to kind of protect a couple of the hand. Let the ravage come in, protect the hand, don't let them die. The blight still comes in, and then the hand are there to kind of counterattack and ravage back. So that's actually quite a nice play pattern to look out for and something that's usually I find quite almost stronger than defend in many ways. And there's obviously a bunch of other kind of unique powers. Stubborn Solidity kind of does this, although it does give you a little bit of defense, but it's a similar type of a thing. And then another thing as well to keep an eye out for here, it's a little bit trickier to do, but it absolutely can come up, where you maybe load up the hand in a land, and maybe get 3, 4, 5 to hand in the land, let the Ravage come in, let the Blight come in, sacrifice 2 or even 3 to hand. They're just going to die in the Ravage anyway, and then they counterattack whatever's left behind, counterattacks back, and the towns are no longer durable. So that is a kind of a way to kind of utilize the hand in a matchup where the hand are one of the weakest across all 8 adversaries. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Finally, let me reiterate this. I've said this already. We're doing loads of reiterating in this show. I'm hoping this will be the last time I reiterate it. Very bad. One strategy, one tactic, one thing you do never want to do against this adversary, and that is trying to stay clean or trying to kill durable towns. It is just an awful return rate. Do not spend your time dealing 4 damage to kill single towns. Absolutely awful. You just will not win. There are very few, as I say, spirits in this game that are going to be able to do that. But I wanted to point out one card here that's really, really nice that can ignore durable, and you can actually go ahead and get a lot of work done on a clean board. And that is, of course, the card Rumbling Earthquake, which ignores health bonuses, and that does count for this adversary, which is quite nice and one to look out for. Now, we're 2.5 hours into the game. I thought I was getting up to my review of my playthrough. I actually am, because I have a couple of spirits here that I had put in at the end. I forgot about them. I'm going to go really quickly through these, and I promise I will this time. I always say, and I always take ages, but I won't here. Really quickly, the best spirits in the game. We've heard some already. Starlight, it's got a skip. It's got plenty of abilities, like I talked about, that can prevent loss conditions. It can draft majors. It can scale well. Roots, we heard that one already. Vitality stops the blight coming in. It has a bunch of effects that remove invaders as opposed to destroying them. So I think Roots can work without a sort of a dangerous and blighted land. It's got a little bit of defense that can stop some lost conditions. Enticing Bringer, one of my absolute favorites, which I've had on the channel before. It's insane into Habsburg. It gathers towns, really, really strong, and then it can stop infinite towns attacking because of that ability that gives everything -. So as long as 1 damage doesn't get through, if you keep everybody down, the +2 from the adjacent land will not count. Finally here, Sun, really, really good one. It adds blight, it wipes big lands, it does loads of damage, it's got a ravage skip, it's got all sorts of great things in there. And some of the worst ones then that we've come up against, Serpent, doesn't like blight, it cancelling majors. It has that kind of elemental aegis, which is an area of effect kind of defend card. Again, it's under duress a little bit, but it can certainly stop the loss conditions, but it'll probably still let a lot of blight in, so not really a great one for Serpent there. Voice then for a controlled spirit. It struggles to kind of keep invaders clumped up. So Voice very much is about pushing invaders and getting them into lands and using its right innate. But it can be a little bit tough to kind of keep things under control because they keep moving around the board. And to be honest, Strife is not really at its best against Habsburg anyway, because it doesn't turn off the +2 in the adjacent land. Of course, if every single invader is Strife when they ravage, yes, it will. But if even one explorer gets to attack, it'll still get the +2. So keep that in mind. Violence Bringer. So we talked about Enticing Bringer, very, very good. Violence Bringer, very, very bad. And it's funny because they're 2 aspects of the same spirit. Of course, Violence just wants to deal loads of damage, and it has no reliability on the kind of durable stuff and all of that. So Violence is not the one to take to this matchup. Shroud of Silent Mist. It's funny, I looked at this, I wanted to point it out because in Red's matchup axis, he has a Shroud of Silent Mist at its base level is rated as an F. He has it as one of the worst matchups in the whole matchup roster, more or less unwinnable, which to an extent I do understand, because you can't remove towns when you really need to. And then your skip is stretch. You've got a little pseudo skip kind of card is stretch, but he has F for the base shroud, and then B+ for Stranded Mist, which somebody talked about earlier on in the show. So is the isolate really the difference between an F and a B+? maybe it is. I thought that was quite interesting. And finally, we didn't ever get to mention them until now. Ocean, we talked about it before, is absolutely fell. Durable, again, absolutely punishes you. And when you try to drown invaders in the ocean, if the ocean does not contain a blight, the drown will attempt to drown them. It'll deal 2 damage to them and it'll push them back to shore. And then if the land is blighted when it goes there, yes, they'll die, but you will not get the energy from drowning. So all sorts of bad news for ocean there. Now, I hope that was pretty quick. That was only a couple of minutes, so I'm glad about that. I do have a playthrough to talk about. I've actually covered a lot of it already throughout the episode. So again, we'll see if we can keep this one a little bit short. We're 2:35 now, so we're well getting up there for our longest podcast so far. Apart from the cocktail one with Ted, which if you haven't heard up until now, I do strongly encourage you to go and listen to that Ted interview. I had a lot of fun with that one. Anyway, we had a playthrough. This is when I'm going to do the floaty thing. It's up here on that side of the corner. Go and watch it. Go and take a look at it. It's an interesting game. Again, it's a long one. I was a bit out of my element with Lure and Green. Certainly not two of my strongest or my favourite spirits, but there was a lot of interesting things happening in the game. If you're back or if you're not going to go and do that or any of that kind of stuff, I will announce the result here. I did win, but it is an enormous asterisk of a win. It's barely even a win. This was the worst cheat, the most egregious cheat so far on the channel. I am so disappointed to say. I came up with such a cool combo, and I have to tell you about it. It was Weave to get to the Fabricate Place. Again, I love this card, and it came up, and it was super cool. I came up with essentially a combo where I had Weave for Lure, and I would Weave with another land with Swallowed by the Wilderness, which is where you deal damage with all your tokens. And I'd keep kind of moving these token factories around the island, and I'd weave it with a land, and I'd weave it with another land, destroy everything, clear the land, and then next turn weave it with another land. And it was awesome. It was so much fun. It was super cool. However, I cheated, because if you weave a inland land, which of course Lure has to be in, if you weave that land with a coastal land, which I did multiple times in the game, first of all, that's a legal play. You are allowed to weave yourself into a coastal land, because the land now is considered coastal, because it's now touching the city. It's not the city, it's touching the ocean. So that land does now get considered coastal. It is no longer considered inland. Because of the rules of the game, the way coastal works is, check, am I adjacent to the ocean? Yes. If so, I'm coastal. If not, if yes, I'm coastal. If the land is not coastal, it's inland. They are mutually exclusive. And I did not consider this as part of the play, because what I was doing was I was weaving an inland land with a coastal land. I did it like twice, maybe even thrice. And then I used Swallowed by the Wilderness in the land to wipe out like bunches of invaders, which is an illegal play, because as soon as the weave resolves and the land becomes joined, it stops being an inland land. And I did that, as I say, 2 or 3 times, and it was super cool. It was awesome. It was so much fun, but unfortunately it was also illegal. So massive asterisk. I can't call it a loss, because it's one of them where, to be honest, I could probably still win that game. I mean, I would have obviously had to play the game totally differently, and I would still probably go ahead and do that awesome combo because it was so much fun. But I would have had to just play the game completely differently. So that's kind of just one of those things. Something interesting came up earlier on in the game, and I just pointed out here quickly because I talked about it earlier in this episode, and here I am reiterating things again. After promising not to. I talked about earlier saying that I don't believe in this concept of my board versus your board. And if you go and check that game out, it was super interesting. So it's a 2-board island, and both of my spirits basically started in land 8 on each board. They were right in the opposite corners of the entire island to each other. But on the very first turn of the game, what I did was I planned for each spirit to essentially make it to the other corner of the island. So I kind of completely swapped boards on the very start of the game. The very beginning strategy that I made was essentially, the way this works is I need to swap boards. So Lure jumped all the way over onto Green's board because he had a really nice situated central inland land that already contained a blight. So I can use that as my kind of token factory. And then Green had a play where I kind of lined up my defend 4 and I had a perfect land for that. There was a perfect kind of candidate land for that, but it was all the way up in the land 8 on the other side of the board. So I had to basically jump myself across the island over a course of 2 turns and get up and defend the 4 in the other corner. And that's the way the game played. In the end, Lure completely stayed on Green's board and Green completely stayed on Lure's board. But again, the way that worked out is I was optimizing my cards and my plays for the other side of the board, and it would have worked completely differently had I not done that. So that's something. I took loads of early blight, obviously, and I got ahead of the tempo. That, as I said, that's the key, and it worked really well. Once a kind of 2-3 turns had passed, I was already way ahead of the tempo of the invaders. I was shutting down ravages completely almost. I did flip the blight card early, but once I flipped it, I don't think I took another blight again, and it was all things weaken, which is taking blight on one single point of damage, and I don't think I took another one for the rest of the game, albeit with cheating loads. So that's that. Anything else for the 2 spirits in particular? Lure here, the left and 8 was really, really strong. Absolutely excellent. I was coming into the game and I wasn't 100% sure how strong it would be. It was great. And I got to repeat it a bunch of times because I was leaning into the to the air and trying to unlock the thresholds for weave as well. So there was a couple of turns where I got both at the same time, and that was amazing. Softly Becking ever inward, I talked about it already. It was absolutely broken. I played it on the first turn and it was amazing, and then I forgot it when I drafted weave, and I talked about it being an insane play because it's such a strong card. And actually, despite, if you put aside the cheating, it actually turned out to be probably the right decision, because I ended up in these kind of reclaim loop stuff. So the reclaim loop worked much better because I wasn't trying to play it with a 2-cost card. Obviously, Swallowed gets a lot weaker in this matchup, and obviously when you pair Swallowed with Weave, it's cheating, so don't do that. But Swallowed, I think in general, gets weaker against Habsburg because, of course, you have to be in the land with the blight, so that's a little bit challenging. And overall, I talked about during the playthrough, and I'll just slightly reiterate it here. I don't really like Lure of the Deep Wilderness very much at all. It's one of my least favorite spirits. I think there's a lot of problematic play and growth patterns to that spirit, and by that I mean it doesn't really have growth patterns. It doesn't really grow. The spirit starts, I said it during the playthrough, I think Lure is one of the strongest spirits in the whole game on the first 2 turns, maybe 3 turns, because you have your payoff already. There is no payoff for Lure. Your payoff is Softly Beckon and Swallowed by the Wilderness. They're just 2 of the strongest in the unique pairs in the whole game, and they're in your opening hand. And you almost don't need anything else. But even more than not needing anything else, you kind of can't get anything else. The way the spirit plays, it forces you and pushes you into a corner. Because it's one of them where you get to a turn, you're like, should I grow, or should I gain a power, or should I just reclaim and use that G3, which gives me a spike of energy and an extra element? And very often, more often than not, the answer is just reclaim and get the extra elements and don't grow anywhere. I think I placed 4 presents, if even. 1, 2, 3, 4 presents in an 8-turn game. And that was, I only barely got the 4th presents over the line. I maybe could have even played the game where I didn't even get that 4th present. So I don't like that. I don't like reclaim loop strategies. I think they're boring, and for me, Lure is one of the biggest offenders. Tangles then, finally, before we close this out here, I think Tangles is significantly weaker than base Green. Do I like it? No, not really. I don't like Green as a spirit to play very much. I think it's pretty one note. I think Gift of Proliferation is just too strong. For similar reasons to what I talked about Stone before, I think having something like that in your kit, it's too much. Now, look, every game has to have something that's too good, right? Everything has to have the best thing. There always has to be the best thing. The best thing being an easily reclaimable Gift of Proliferation it's problematic. And I think, kind of the design team, and I think we even talked about that with Ted before. It's like he said that multiple, I think, times, maybe on the Kindred Spirit podcast as well, that's just, it's too cheap, it's too easy. You can reclaim it almost every turn if you really want to, and it's just too powerful. Tangles gets rid of Gifted Proliferation, which is really good. And for that reason, I like it more than base green. But it still has all the choking stuff, which is, again, just kind of a bit too strong. Like, green has Gifted Proliferation, the free choke ability that it can use as many times as it has presence, and then almost nothing else. And that still makes it one of the best spirits in the game. And that's kind of just wrong. It's got, like, the left innate is terrible. The right innate is okay in some matchups, but it's terrible in others. And like the other 3 cards in its hands are also kind of crap. It's got 1 card that lets it proliferate itself onto the board, which for a lot of other spirits will be broken. But for green, it isn't really, because green's growth tracks are actually not great. So yeah, it kind of just becomes this, I'll just fiddle around and I'll just maybe find a major and I'll play it, and there's very little identity. So I'm waffling here. I don't like green very much. I don't think Tangles changes the spirit all that much, and I actually don't even think the Tangles ability or the belligerent extra card that you get from that are all that interesting or strong. I think one thing that I would really have liked to see with the belligerent card, and I said it during the playthrough and I'll say it now, it deals a flat 2 damage if you have the kind of wilds combo, the adjacent wilds. I would have really liked to have seen that card scale with the number of blight, where it didn't deal a flat 2, it dealt damage equal to the number of blight in or adjacent to target land. Now that ultimately may well be too strong. So, you know, I haven't tested this, and if I had to guess, it's probably too good. But I think that would be significantly more interesting, because as it happened, I just ended up in this game where I was like, never really wanted to play the belligerent card. I'd use it for maybe elements. I played it once or twice. It dealt like 2 damage. It killed a town, and it was just like, the whole wilds theme and feel just wasn't really there for me, because it was like, oh yeah, I qualify, I have the thing, okay, I'll kill a town, and that was the payoff, and the payoff was boring. So anyway, don't really like it. Voice of Command was the MVP in that whole game. My whole game ended up just being Voice of Command and then choking. I choked a bunch of Ravages, and then later in the game I choked a bunch of Bills to kind of get over the line. Once I realized I was close to a win condition, I choked like 3 Bills, and then I just about got there in the end, albeit with a cheating win. That is all of that. We're now 2:47. We'll get this done before the end of the 3 hours. So that is going to be Habsburg Livestock, and I am chuffed to say that's 3/4 of the way through. I'll have a sip of beer to celebrate that. So that's 6 of 8, 3/4 for those of us who's who's doing the lowest common denominator stuff. It's been a bit of a road so far, and we are left with the 2 difficulty 11 adversaries. Again, one of them is diff 11 and one was diff 10, and it kind of got officially, unofficially errated up to diff 11. So it is, of course, England and Russia as the final 2. It should probably be no surprise to too many people that those are the last 2 left on the list in terms of how I rank them for difficulty. The question is, what's first and what's second? I can now announce that in second place, and the adversary, which I will be reviewing next, it's going to be the Kingdom of England. England are second, which of course means Russia are first, but we'll get to Russia eventually. England are what's coming up next, and the way I rank them, if I'm using my kind of again, the relative rating that I've been doing all across the series so far, I had Habsburg as a 10.5. I have England as a 10.75. I do think they're distinctly easier than Russia. Again, not by much, but I do think there is a distinct difference. And that means, of course, I'm going to put Russia at all the way up in difficulty 11. But England, 10.75, absolutely a challenge. Huge challenge for very, very many spirits. And speaking of a very many spirits, I do, of course, as always, have 3 matchups for you to choose from. So you get to choose who I am going to play. Now, again, we always do this. We do this kind of, easy, medium, and kind of, or not easy, easy, hard, and wildcard matchup. So we will start off, and we'll talk about, first of all, is going to be our easy matchup, and this is going to be Team Quake, and this is going to look like Serpent slumbering beneath the island and dances up earthquakes. two spirits that have an earthquake built into the kit. So I think this could be a lot of fun. And this is two spirits that do a lot of scaling, and they do a lot of ramping up, of course, and there's all sorts of earthquaking things happening later in the game. This is the kind of sling majors, go bananas, slobber knocker type matchup. So I think this could be really, really fun and cool. Red Revenge has these both listed as an A matchup into England, which I could appreciate. I think that's probably sounds about right to me. But I think a lot of fun. And I just love playing against England. So I never talked about it. I said earlier in the episode that my favourite adversaries yes to come, it's England. I love playing against England. England are awesome. So I love those big just slobber knocker matchups, playing loads of majors, as you probably know by now. So this one could be a lot of fun. That's your Team Quake. Up next, this is your hard matchup, and this is going to be Shifting Memory of Ages with the Mentor aspect and Vital Strength of the Earth with the Might aspect. This is Team Grated Cheese. So this is like minor cheese. It's like a small amount of cheese. It's not the big cheesy serpent team cheese that people know and love that contains some of these spirits. It's only two of the spirits, and it doesn't contain the serpent. So you get a little bit of the elemental teachings with the how do you call it, the gift of strength, some of that sort of stuff going on there. You can maybe gift of strength with some major combos and sort of copy majors and things like that. So I think basically Red Revenge has these listed as a C for both. So Mentor Memory and Might are both listed as a C matchup for England. But I think together, I'd have to guess that that's better than a C when you put the two together. There's obviously some nice synergies that are going on there, and I think there could be a lot of fun to be had with that one. I am a massive fan of Mentor Memory, certainly one of my favorite spirits and aspects of the game. But yeah, again, I think that's potentially a really fun matchup as well there. So would love to play that one too. Finally, our wildcard matchup is going to be Finder of Paths Unseen and Shroud of Silent Mist with the Stranded aspect. And this is going to be your Team Isolate. So we talked about Shroud of Mist, the Stranded Mist during this episode already today, and how the Isolate can be really powerful. Here, this is our Team Isolate, because of course, Finder of Paths Unseen is the Isolate master, and Finder of Paths Unseen is my second favorite spirit in the whole game, behind only Starlight Seeks Its Form. So I love Finder. Finder's awesome. And Finder and Shroud, isolating everywhere. Yes, it turns off adjacency builds, but is that enough? It could be. It could be. I have these listed as a B matchup on both aspects from Red Revenge's list. He gives Finder and Stranded a B each. But this could be one where it could go both ways. Combine them both together, do they get better than a B or do they get worse? Again, on my hard matchup with Mentor and Earth, I figure when you put the two together, it improves on a C. But here, they both have similar weaknesses. Finder can't get rid of stuff, right? So Finder can move stuff around, it can isolate, it can prevent stuff and all that. But it doesn't want to clump everything into one land because it can't, because of the loss condition with England. It generally doesn't remove invaders from the board. And Shroud of Silent Mist doesn't do a whole pile of removing invaders from the board either, especially when they have extra toughness. So I think both spirits have similar strengths, but also similar weaknesses. And it could be a matchup where the weakness compounds, actually, in both cases, and makes that a worse matchup for both. So not 100% sure, and that's again another one I would be truly chuffed and delighted to play. I would be super happy to play any of these because I'm super happy to play England. I can't wait for my England playthrough. But please, that is now, if you're listening to this live on my YouTube channel, not live, but yourself, semi-live, one take, all that kind of stuff. If you're listening to this on YouTube, that means that my poll is live. It is active. It's over there. Go and finish this video. Go and vote in the poll. Pick pick which one of them you'd like me to watch, and please do, of course, watch the video as well. Don't just vote, but also watch the video, because we're going to have a blast. We're going to play England. It's going to be about 10 hours long, and it's going to be a blast, and we're going to have so much fun. But that is going to be it for this episode. I did just about reach the end of my beer, so I'll finish that. What are we now? We're actually after midnight. We can go on for a while. What are we? 2 hours 55, just shy of 3 hours. As always, if you're here, if you're watching this, if you've just listened to me talk for 3 hours about Habsburg Livestock, you are awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real pleasure and a real joy to have you come along for the ride. Really enjoyed it. Again, look, if you enjoyed what you saw, please do consider liking. If you haven't already, hit the all subscribe and all that other good stuff. The notification bell. Share with your mates. Get involved in the comments. Comments this time around, we're going to be looking at what works against England. What are we looking out for? Some of the spirits I mentioned, are any of them good? Are they bad? What do you think of those? There was a bunch of stuff that came up in the video that I was asking about if any you were listening along and getting down in the comments, but I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear what you think about England. If you get some comments in about England, they'll be in the next episode. I'll be going through what you had to say. But that is going to be it. I truly am out of breath at this stage. But look, again, one final time, thanks so much for being here. But until the next time, and until the England episode, may your manifestations be always powerful and glorious. See you then.